images which had been stolen from her iCloud account. It's not clear if the hackers did this in response to Milo's ban from Twitter, but given the timing, most people believe
those people seem to really love Ghostbusters.
It was at this point that the vitriol surrounding Ghostbusters 2016 hit its peak and began to die down somewhat. Both those who loved and hated the films seemed to agree that things had gone too far. While this may have been the end of the story for female Ghostbusters, it wouldn't be long.
Not female Ghostbusters.
Found a whole new target to get outraged at. Starting with the Gamergate movement in 2014, the war between gamers and game journalists has raged on. It's become a stereotype that people who review video games often aren't very good at playing them. And there are a couple of noteworthy examples that are pointed to in order to prove this statement. On May 12th, 2016, the day before the launch of the highly anticipated Doom reboot, a video showcasing the first 30 minutes of gameplay. This was an ongoing series for the Gaming Press website, and was a standard part of coverage for most big releases. However, this video was different. Viewers quickly took note of how poorly the game was being played. The person holding the controller was frequently missing shots, awkwardly stumbling around the map, missing obvious chances to
They had the editor record the gameplay video because he was sick or something. The editor's like, you know I don't play video games, and the guy's like, oh, but I'm sick, I don't have any dope. and so the Polygon guy's like, fine, I'm an editor, but I'll go do a video game playthrough. And so this guy who's never played video games before like does the review for Doom, and this got out, and it's just funny. And I imagine the story is kind of like that, something like that probably. I have to find my way to the harbor, and I don't know which way to go anymore. Let's see if I can get out of it this way, but I don't think I have enough fuel. I don't have enough fuel to do that. Nope. Oh, did I aggro? No, I didn't aggro. No. I mean, I don't know where to go or what to do. I'm lost now, and that sucks. I don't really understand how I'm lost. I'll go back the way that I came, I think, on the road. I took the wrong tri-way on the road, I think, when it was too dark to see that I was on the wrong one. Here's a pump shack, but I don't remember how these work. Like, I don't know. It's like, there's the loot, but it's like, I think it's wood and what is it? Is it like wood? No, it's like, oh, it's diesel. It's diesel. That's right. I always forget. I mean, I guess I should loot water treatment, but I'm not really. Like, this run has been pretty long. I don't feel that good about this run. I'd like to get home. I'd rather deal with the fact that I'm lost than try to loot that monument right now. Yeah, there's the road, I think, which is good. That was the main thing. I had to find the road again. Those Jimmy Dean sausages are actually really fucking good. I'm gonna start buying a bunch of those. Here's the road. That's good. This will take me back the way I came to where I got lost anyways.
Joined together in mocking it, Polygon already had a poor reputation in the gaming landscape, and this was used as further proof that they were an untrustworthy source for gaming news. But many onlookers simply wondered why such a hotly anticipated new game had been given to someone who clearly had little experience with first-person shooters in the first place.
That was a
For
player?
days, Polygon was the laughingstock of the video game world, and they did not take it well. Instead of deleting their
it was such a good shot. Yeah.
Response as best they could. But this would not be the last time a gaming journalist made a fool of themselves for playing a game poorly. In August of 2017, a journalist for VentureBeat by the name of Dean Takahashi traveled to the Gamescom convention in Germany. While there, he was given the opportunity to try out several upcoming releases, including the indie favorite Cuphead. Despite his self-confessed ineptitude at the 2D side-scroller genre, Dean gave it a shot and recorded his gameplay. When the footage was sent back to his fellow VentureBeat staff members, they
I took like the wrong road out of Sat Dish.
Viewers also found entertainment in how bad this gameplay was. The most notable part of this footage came at the very beginning. as the journalist tried and failed for 90 seconds to overcome the very first simple obstacle in the recording. While he was able to finally escape the training sequence after another minute of trial and error, he was unable to make it past even the first
He couldn't do
level,
that jump.
despite trying for nearly half an hour.
Oh
Much
no.
like the Doom gameplay from Polygon.
Wait, I want to rewatch this. This is funny. This is what I always suspected. I'm like, Jesus Christ, the journalists who play these games don't know how to play video games. How did that come about? There's so many video game fanatics on the planet. Why are these fucking stooges doing our video games media? Like, you want to know who I want a review from of Fortnite? Ninja. Like, how's the new season, Ninja? I don't trust, motherfucking IGN, you know? Ugh. Okay, so I see where I made my mistake. There's a tri-road, and I didn't know that. It was so dark that I couldn't, like, determine it. So I took the wrong way down the tri-road and learned that I can get to water treatment from my base fairly quickly with, like, a horse or some kind of by means. I want to go get a snowmobile from Arctic Treatment with a blue card and ride it out here to water treatment and get because those are fast, you know. And well, I want to get a mini heli, I guess. I'll just get a mini heli and fly it to the crate. Oh, hey, there's a laptop. Now I kind of want to go back to water treatment because if the fucking crate's sitting there, I can just open it. But I mean, I have a chainsaw on me, and if I encounter somebody at water treatment and die, I won't have the chainsaw, and the chainsaw solves a lot of problems for me. I didn't get around to researching it last time, and ugh. I have to put points in the mining shard, but I'd rather do it in the scavenging shard because I scavenge more than I mine. I kind of wish I could get my metal off the scavenging shard and just not worry about the mining shard at all. Just get the stones slowly to do each bit of the base, and I don't know. How long till those boys see me? I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I have a vendetta with them now or not. I don't care, but I just thought like, more like the information might be kind of valuable. Do they hate me now? I don't care. I don't care. Like, I used to really fucking... I never did really care what people thought of me. I cared if they liked me. You know? But I don't care what they think of me. I just want them to like me because I've never harmed anybody or done anything that bad. Well, I guess I do care if people like me. I admit it. But I don't care what they think. That is the difference. I don't care what they think about my career or my drug use or my fucking... criminality or the girls that I was with or any of that stuff. I just, you know, I care if people like me. I definitely do, you know. I wouldn't be a streamer if I didn't. But I definitely don't care what they think of my life, you know. Like, I don't care what they think about me. I just care if they like me. Those are two separate things. Liking and thinking good about somebody isn't the same thing as liking them. You know? Like, I think good of Bill Gates, you know, because he's like the #1 philanthropist of all time, but I don't like him, you know, and that can happen at the same time. I wish they would have done the
Mocked
second
the
longer.
critic and wondered how he even got a job in gaming journalism. However, the response from VentureBeats was very different than that of Polygon. They kept rating and comments on their video public for all to see, seemingly enjoying the outrage it was causing. Dean, on the other hand, was less amused. He engaged in several back and forths on Twitter with people who were making fun of him, and seemed defensive about the level of scrutiny he was now receiving. Gamers also began digging into his history, and found a review Dean had written for Mass Effect in 2007, in which he criticized the game for its difficulty while seemingly not realizing he was supposed to level up his character. Eventually, Dean published an article apologizing
I want to
to
hear
those
this
who were
bit
upset with his
again.
footage, and to other game.
I want to hear this whole segment again. This was very funny. These fucking scrubs. How did you get to the top of the gaming journalist media, but you can't play video games even through the tutorials? How did you? I mean, how? I guess you're a professional person and you just provide a product and it doesn't have to do anything. I guess you're a. It's, you know what it's like? It's like an ESPN sports journalist who's never been to a football game. You know, watching him try to figure out what a quarterback does. Oh.
Movement in 2014, the war between gamers and game journalists has raged on. It's become a stereotype that people who review video games often aren't very good at playing them, and there are a couple of noteworthy examples that are pointed to in order to prove this statement. On May 12, 2016, the day before the launch of the highly anticipated Doom reboot,
Polygon.
uploaded
I'm
a
never
video
gonna trust
showcasing
Polygon
the first
again,
30 minutes
ever.
of gameplay. This was an ongoing series for the Gaming Press website, and was a standard part of coverage for most big releases. However, this video was different. Viewers quickly took note of how poorly the game was being played. The person holding the controller was frequently missing shots, awkwardly stumbling around the map, missing obvious chances to perform glory kills on enemies, and in general seemed to have a poor grasp on first-person shooter mechanics. Once this video was made public, the internet joined together in mocking it. Polygon already had a poor reputation in the gaming landscape, and this was used as further proof that they were an untrustworthy source for gaming news. But many onlookers simply wondered why such a hotly anticipated new game had been given to someone who clearly had little experience with first-person shooters in the first place. For a few days, Polygon was the laughingstock of the video game world, and they did not take it well. Instead of deleting their upload, they chose to disable likes and comments in order to cover up the negative response as best they could. But this would not be the last time a gaming journalist made a fool of themselves for playing a game poorly. In August of 2017, a journalist for VentureBeats by the name of Dean Takahashi traveled to the Gamescom convention in Germany. While there, he was given the opportunity to try out several upcoming releases, including the indie favorite Cuphead. Despite his self-confessed ineptitude at the 2D side-scroller genre, Dean gave it a shot and recorded his gameplay. When the footage was sent back to his fellow VentureBeat staff members, they found it so amusing that they decided to upload it to YouTube. Viewers also found entertainment in how bad this gameplay was. The most notable part of this footage came at the very beginning, as the journalist tried and failed for 90 seconds to overcome the very first simple obstacle in the tutorial. While he was able to finally escape the training sequence after another minute of trial and error, he was unable to make it past even the first level, despite trying for nearly half an hour. Much like the Doom gameplay from Polygon, audiences mocked the critic and wondered how he even got a job in gaming journalism. However, the response from VentureBeats was very different.
You're just a turd out there. You were just a turd out there. You just couldn't run. You couldn't jump. You were just a turd out there. So yeah. You were just a turd out there.
That of Polygon. They kept rating and comments on their video.
You couldn't jump, you couldn't run.
Seemingly enjoying the outrage it was causing. Dean, on the other hand, was less amused. He engaged in several back and forths on Twitter with people who were making fun of him, and seemed defensive about the level of scrutiny he was now receiving. Gamers also began digging into his history, and found a review Dean had written for Mass Effect in 2007, in which he criticized the game for its difficulty while seemingly not realizing
Mass Effect! Mass Effect is the easiest game ever made! What are you talking about? This is the most generic piece of shit combat game ever made. It gets harder, yeah. If you go to places that aren't your level or whatever.
Eventually,
Piece of
Dean
shit,
published an
fucking
article
Mass
apologizing
Effect.
to those who were upset with his footage, and to other gaming
Yeah,
journalists.
you better
who had faced
apologize. You're
scrutiny
fucking,
due to
you're
his
a
lack of
turd out
skill.
there. You're just a turd out there. You can't play video games. Don't be a video game journalist. If you can't play football, don't be a professional football player. If you can't play video games, don't be a video game journalist. Simple concept. Apparently, like we just, like with the internet age, we just have a whole bunch of imposters. Just bad actors just trying to act like there's something when they're not.
Read the climate in which it was received. He once again reiterated that he was aware of how bad he was at the game, and
you know, I think it's kind of funny. What year did The Talented Mr. Ripley come out, right? I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie, but I think it was actually a really fucking good movie. Talented Mr. Ripley, right? 1999, yeah. Right about the year 2000, when Hollywood was pretty much like, hey, you can fake it to make it and just steal someone's life and just be Catch Me If You Can if you want, or Talented Mr. Ripley, you can just be a check forger or be a grifter or just take someone's life and murder them and take over their lives and stuff like this. And you can totally be talented and be considered talented by us, right? And so then, yeah, we got a fucking generation of imposters that aren't actually who they say they are. That's really weird. Like, when I cut a music video on YouTube, and I've been slow about this, but you don't write albums quick, you know? I'm three or four songs into an album, and and I try to let all the feelings and all the emotion of the last few months deal into a song or something like that. And it's a concept album and it takes time. And one of the things I don't do is make music videos if I hadn't been in a band for 8 years, or something like that. I mean, everyone has to start out somewhere. So of course there's YouTubers who just made videos and were talented and got successful. But most of the time I wouldn't do a music video as an artist if you didn't have some background in the music scene. It's kind of like that, I don't go around making music videos without having been in the scene for 8 years. This guy, he makes video game critiques, but he can't get past the tutorial on Cuphead, which is like, press A to jump, press B to shoot. It's got to be the most fucking basic game we've had since, Mario 1? With the flower power, the gameplay in Cuphead is essentially flower power from Mario 1. It's not a concept that's that hard, or maybe a little bit better than that. Call it Contra. If you can play Contra, you can fucking play Cuphead. They're the exact same fucking game, If you could play Contra in 1986, but here you are, getting money instead of me in the video game industry, And imposters like you are why everything sucks. It's why the government's worthless. We got to get both parties out of there. It's why,
Citing VentureBeat's official Cuphead review.
You know what the one thing I've seen the news actually say beyond how much they hate Trump the last 5 years is how both parties' approval ratings are in the toilet. Like 8% or something like that. They aren't currying favor. I don't even think the Democrats like Biden anymore. I don't think anybody likes the Republican or the Democratic Party.
Series is one of the most popular.
I think they identify as them because they're the only choice. But I think secretly, deep down, I don't think there's an American who isn't in the government who actually likes the bipartisan system. I don't think anymore. I'll even hear my mom talk shit about Biden being too old, but she's like pure blood Democrat, war chest Democrat, But I mean, even she is like you can start to see the cracks start to form, and it's like we need something better than this.
In 2017, its latest installment, Super Mario Odyssey, was shaping up to be one of
Oh no, this guy couldn't beat the first level of Odyssey.
Nintendo's biggest releases.
That's a kid's game, yo. I would see that being challenging to an 8-year-old. Who just picked up his first controller, and he's like, what are video games? And they're so bright and pretty and cool, and I love all the colors, and the music's so happy and go lucky. It's Mario. That's what they were always talking about when they said Mario. And you can see the 8-year-old kind of sucking at the first level of Super Mario Sunshine. But a grown journalist, You don't think you might need to play the game for a couple of days before you do some review? And maybe address the idea that you might not know how to play video games, and you're a video game journalist. What is this, talented Mr. Ripley video game journalist edition? You just killed some journalists and took over their lives, I guess, and you're just masquerading as a fucking games journalist who can't even beat the first level of Super Mario Odyssey. Every way they run this fucking world is every bit of fraud. That's Tech9. That's word to Tech9. Every way that the legit people in this world run this world is absolutely as corrupt and fucked up. We got politicians who have never read the Constitution. We have, like, you know, who took the presidency. We have like people who can't read. We have, I mean, I don't know what happened here, man. Like, we got game journalists who can't beat the tutorial levels. I don't know, man.
Mario in a variety of different outfits, rather than simply...
Is it that hard for you? I mean, I think of game journalism money as being at least 60 grand to start. 60 grand for the shittiest rag on the internet. It's like 60 grand to start. Journalism pays. It pays pretty well. Journalists who actually intend to be in it and want to write and want to do content and work for a bigger .com company and all this, it pays. It pays between 35 and 60 to start, and it just goes up from there. It pays pretty well. So I know why you're in there fucking masquerading. You just want to, like, you know, you just want to fucking bullshit your way through a fucking video game journalism thing because you played Mario once and you remember liking Mario when you were a kid. But when Mario Sunshine comes up in the roster, you can't beat the tutorial. And it's like, I don't know, man. Like, you picked the wrong career. At that point, my advice to you is to quit your job. Go on down to whatever you used to like to do when you were a kid or whatever. Maybe go buy a guitar from Guitar Center, or... you know, go buy a surfboard or a flute. Do what I did. I bought a flute and I taught myself how to play the flute when I was in the madhouse. You know, now I stopped playing the flute, but I know how to play the flute. I like did YouTube lessons for months on end and taught myself how to play the flute, right? My recommendation is, if you suck that bad at a fucking tutorial as a game journalist, go buy a flute and learn to do that. Go buy a bonsai tree and trim it. Something like that. Don't sit in the fucking video game journalism fucking sphere and suck up the money and the air and the space from somebody who actually would die for that fucking job. You know how many kids on this planet would die to be a fucking video game journalist? They would just die. They could die a happy death. They'd be like, oh my God, I could just cover video games for the rest of my life, phone in some crappy blog every like 20 days and just play video games all day for 50 grand a year or 100 grand a year. Yeah, you can. It's called video game journalism, apparently. Yeah, but this guy's not even like that. This guy, he's probably going on down to the sports bar to blow his money on beer, and then goes to the horse races or something, right? But he's a video game journalist, and then when they give him a game to play, you know, he sucks dick on the tutorial. And I'm sorry, but like, I don't. If you're a video game journalist, unless you're something super specific, like I am a Madden tourney journalist or something like that, that's super specific, right? Where all I do is Madden, right? Or all I do, like for Ninja, I don't expect Ninja to be super fucking good at World of Warcraft, right? Now, I expect him to be able to get out of Elwyn Forest, and I expect he would be good at it because he plays Final Fantasy 11. I expect he would be good at it, but I don't expect that from him. He's the ninja guy, right? So there's an example. Yeah, sorry, not ninja guy. He's the Fortnite guy. So there's an example of a specific pigeonhole where it might be acceptable to make him a games journalist because he's still going to get past the tutorial level. He's actually a good gamer, but you don't belong in the industry. I always suspected it. Sometimes I wonder, like, maybe if I could have picked up a game journalism thing. Like when I was a kid, I submitted the first American tips and tricks picture of Yoshi at the top of the castle on Mario 64 because I had a Japanese N64 and a Japanese copy of N64. I got it like a year. I got it like 18 or it's like 14 months before it came out in the U.S. And I was like so popular with all my friends because I had this N64 game that was like 18 months before the release. It was insane. And all the rags were talking about it, but I had it in my house, and it made me immensely popular with some of the nerd kids for a while. When I was like 13, this happened, and I would cart my 64 around to their houses. I was the 64 kid because I had a 64 in Super Mario World like maybe 14 months before it came out in the U.S. I know it sounds crazy, but you know, well, it's a long story, but and it's not my story, so I'm not going to tell it. But yeah, I had that 64 and like 12 months before, and I submitted the Yoshi thing when I found it to Tips and Tricks, and they published me, and they published my name and my picture, and and I wonder maybe if I had been able after that if I could have written them a letter being like, would you take a young writer who would like to provide you his take on Super Mario Land 2. You know, I want to tell you what I think of Super Mario Land 2. All I wanted from them was to send me games. I should have written a letter to them being like, I would like to write journalism for you for free because I'm like, you know, like 10, I was 12 years old, and like, but would you let me write for you, like let me write critiques for you. You don't even have to like publish it. You can just take my critiques. I don't care. I thought about doing that when I was a kid, but I was like, yeah, but I don't know. I don't have any clout with these people. They don't know who I am, you know? And so then I think, oh, well, here we are 20 years later. I decided that I wasn't, you know, like, you know, going to be in the journalism of video games anyways. I guess you could call me a video game journalist to a degree, but not really. Not really. And so... And then I see somebody, talented Mr. Ripley, in a fucking video game journalist career. And I'm like, couldn't you have picked some other fucking place to play your little talented Mr. Ripley game? Couldn't you have picked like, you know, I don't know, what's a good fucking what's a good employment opportunity for a putz who wants to pretend he's good at something? Teaching? Go be a teacher.
Costumes were completely innocuous.
Like I'm sorry, no, teachers are putzes, you know, but I'm just saying teacher is a good job for somebody who can but doesn't, right? They can do trigonometry, but they don't do it professionally. They teach it to other people, right? They say those who can't do teach, right? And so, and I don't mean to imply that teachers are putzes. That's really not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say you could probably teach people how to be a game journalist, and it would be a lot more honest than pretending to be a game journalist, you know? You should put YouTube's on videos on YouTube about how to become a game journalist and capitalize on that because you were successful doing that. But you aren't a successful video game journalist. Please get out of essentially my territory, motherfucker. I don't want faking to make it motherfuckers in my territory. It's too cutthroat. There's 3.5 billion fucking gamers on the planet. It's too fucking cutthroat for one of you guys to be fucking masquerading. And I see this in other professions too. Like I had a doctor. I felt she was masquerading. And sure enough, she put a fucking plate in my shoulder that was for an old lady. And they had to go back in 3 times to fix that. And then eventually they just let it heal without a plate. Because they were like, well, we've done so much, you've ripped it out and done so much damage to it. And I was like, well, but it's a tiny plate. And they're like, true, this is for a woman with osteoporosis. And they're like, we must admit we made an error. And I was like, okay. Well, you were doing it for free, so I'm not going to sue you. But you pretty much destroyed my clavicle, you know. You did it for free, so I'm not going to sue you. You were trying to help me. But that's an example of somebody masquerading. She was a doctor. But I wouldn't say she was that good of a doctor. if she's making mistakes like that, apparently. But everyone makes mistakes. I couldn't tell. You know, she wasn't masquerading. She was just busy. And it sucks. You know, you want to blame him for being an imposter, but she was not an imposter. That's ridiculous. She just made an error that only an imposter would make. I should have sued them, but, I mean, it was all free. If I had spent $1 on that, had I lost $1 on that, I would have sued them. But I mean, I didn't, so.
In Odyssey's Mexico-inspired desert world,
another good argument for free healthcare, you know, is maybe we sue our doctors less if it doesn't cost us any money, you know, when they force you to go through 3 unnecessary shoulder surgeries. I mean, I hate speaking cold hard reality like that because it seems so depressing and fucked up. But I mean, let's state what they did. They put me through 3 unnecessary unnecessary surgeries. So fun, let me tell you. 3 unnecessary surgeries in my fucking clavicle and shoulder because they put the wrong plate in. And yeah, been such a good life that I've lived with unnecessary surgery and men who want to kill me and men who stalk me for years on the internet. Been pretty fun. Thanks.
Were able to purchase a sombrero and poncho for Mario to wear. This outfit was featured heavily in the marketing in order to show off the wide variety of new clothes available to the titular plumber. Some people took offense to this choice, though, stating that the use of the clothing
titular
was
plumber. I hate the
appropriation.
okay. So the AI and the fucking nerds, the ones that didn't actually get like college educations in English and the language and literature and shit like that, they overuse words like titular and MacGuffins, and it drives me fucking crazy. You don't hear those words very often. They misuse them because they're pseudo-intellectual. They're pretending to be nerds, just like the people that they're covering, and it drives me crazy. You would never use titular to describe the titular plumber. No. Titular is a word you would use for, like, the most common one you would have heard in the last 120 years was when he I guess Mario was I guess you could say, no. Titular plumber is a misusage of the word. The titular plumber, right? That's a total fucking misuse of the word. Complete fucking, like like, you know, Yeats would roll in his grave. It's a complete massacre of the fucking language, and it offends me as an actual fucking English nerd when these fucking idiots speak, and then they program the AI to speak badly afterwards, because it's his script written badly, and then run through a chat GPT, right? So, because he's not stupid, he needs a script that actually is worth a damn, that doesn't have grammatical errors and all this stuff, but he still wrote so badly that the AI doesn't know to correct him. The AI doesn't have a good sense of language, it just has the language, that's it, right? So a good sense of the language is, in a titular role, like Super Mario Brothers, Mario excels, but Mario has had many roles. Titular is a descriptor for a noun. It is not a adjective as he used it. Titular plumber. He uses it like an adjective, right? An adjective is a word that you use to describe something, right? Titular is not an adjective. It is a title. Your titular role, right? Your titular work. It is this thing that, let's go look at the actual definition of it. It's hard to define it perfectly without making errors, so let's go do it. But listening to him mangle the language really fucking bothers me. And YouTube nerds who think that they're super intelligent, I see it all the time. They don't even have a grasp of the language, though, much less what they're talking about sometimes. You know, they don't even have the grasp of good English language sometimes. I caught one of them mispronouncing a really funny word. And they all want to say that they mispronounce words because they're trolling us, but no, it's because they're not very verbose. You know, they're actually not. You know, so definition of titular, right? We're just gonna make sure that what I'm saying is true because I don't want to jade you on this grammar Nazi thing I'm doing here. But it's not a grammar Nazi thing I'm doing here. I'm talking about the usage of the language is literally dumb. It's like you're trying to come across as this super nerd, but your language is like idiocracy dumb. You know? Please do what I ask you to do. Okay. It has multiple. See, the titular character, the titular role. So the titular track. So if you have like Taylor Swift's 1983, the album, if she wrote a song that she named the album after, that would be the titular track. You would never say the titular plumber. You could say he was the titular character of Super Mario Brothers. That would be correct. But you use it like titular, like it's an adjective when it is it is a well, I mean, it means holding or constituting a purely formal position or title without any real authority, or denoting a person or thing from whom or which the name of an artistic work or similar is taken. So it's weird because he's using it incorrectly, but the definition and the grammar is correct, so the AI doesn't trip up. But a good writer, and maybe he's not a writer, maybe he's just a content provider, give him the benefit of the doubt. A good writer never would have written it like that. The titular plumber is a phrase that just bothers my fucking brain in so many ways. It's like a weird violation of the language that only like a faker would, like I don't understand why you're writing scripts if you're writing the scripts like this, because you're writing them in such a weird, faceted, bad way that it's even sliding past the AI, who can't determine that your language is incorrect because grammatically it's not, but the usage is incorrect. You would never say to the titular plumber. I guess you could, but you wouldn't say Mario's the titular plumber. You would say the no. I mean, yeah, it's a hard word to use, I would say, and he used it correctly grammatically, but it was a misusage. It came across. It tripped me up so badly, like a hurdle on a running track, that I didn't clear. I face planted on his usage of it because it's not correct. It was not the correct usage of it, and the AI should have known better.
Posts of this nature were few and far.
But the AI isn't perfect yet. I'm guessing he didn't run this through AI. He might have just done it through a spell checker, because the AI, I think, would have forced him to rewrite the sentence, because titular plumber is, I guess it works as the end of a sentence, but it doesn't work as an adjective to describe Mario. It is an adjective, but it is not correct as usage of a description, as a descriptor. It is not a descriptor, right? It is not is what they would call it. It is not a descriptor. It is it is an adjective, but it is not a descriptor adjective. It is like it's like a role adjective. It is like a describer, or not describer, but that's not the right word at all. It's not a descriptor. It's like a pronoun. When you say titular, it's not a pronoun, but it plays like a pronoun, because it's almost like fireman Sandy, right? You can use it like that. You can say titular plumber, but you wouldn't say Mario in the same sentence. He was the titular plumber. He was the proper usage of the words would have been, he was the titular plumber in this series Super Mario Brothers, right? But that's not how you said it.
Anyone expressing this sentiment on Twitter was
misusage
by Mexican people, claiming that they had no problem with
the I could tell it
culture.
I know, because it would drive my mother crazy, and she would, like, my mother, she started this stupid nervous tick at me. Sometimes they'll use dumb grammar. And so bad grammar, and I was like kind of making fun of myself. I was like, sometimes they'll use dumb grammar because it's bad grammar, but I mean, like, sometimes they'll use bad grammar. I call it dumb grammar because it kind of gives away that they weren't formally educated. You go through 4 years of college as a writer. This stuff, you'll pull a D on your paper doing stuff like this. I'm not kidding. So, and your grades at stake. So you stop making mistakes like that when you're a professional writer. You're like a hack. You're like a YouTube hack who runs your scripts through an AI just to make sure they're okay, I think. And it's weird because normally script writers should actually be good writers, right? And it's weird because you're doing subject content about video game journalists who are pretending to be video game journalists. And it's crazy because I believe you're a video game journalist who's pretending to be a video game journalist because you can't write, which is so weird. You're like, your whole job is this script, but you can't write. You understand the irony of it all? The sheer irony of it all. The content is such that it's a video game journalist who's faking being a video game journalist, delivered by a video game journalist who's faking to be a video game journalist. And it's funny that that's his subject content. Do you see it? Psychologically, it doesn't surprise me that this is his subject content because he might be faking it to make it as a YouTube creator if he's using grammar like that. You know?
Nevertheless, Nintendo clearly didn't want
like when I think of YouTube, I call it the bigs. You know what I'm saying? People who went to college for this, not some kid. You know, I know that half of YouTube is some kid just writing a script. I get it. That's beautiful. That's a wonderful part of it. It really is. But I mean, when you have 1 million subs, your grammar should maybe be correct. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard.
Remained in the game.
It's hard to say.
The image of the costume was quickly removed from Odyssey's box art prior to release.
Uh-oh.
Bill Nye taught a generation of children to love science with
This is boring me, and I obviously don't like the guy that much, so I'm going to get off it. These icebergs kind of annoy me, too, frankly. I'm just looking for good YouTube. I haven't watched much YouTube content lately, so. Oh yeah, I was gonna watch this one. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Cool. Thank you, Candle Type 1A.
Final Fantasy, eh? I tell
Oh
you,
yeah.
I love me some Final Fantasy.
Oh,
I
me
have
too.
done
It's
since
so
I
near
was-
and dear to my heart, like the women in my life that I've loved. Final Fantasy is the sweet embrace of a wonderful, beautiful woman, naked at night and cold. And you're cuddled up in front of the fire, and you've got like a bearskin rug and a couple of glasses of wine, and her hair kind of like falls around your neck as you're like spooning and stuff, and like, oh yeah, that's how sweet Final Fantasy was to me in my life. Thank you, Square Enix, for locking me out of my 20-year account and breaking my heart. You made the greatest game of all time, Final Fantasy XI, and I love you. And I would make sweet love to you down by the fire if I could. Thank you, Square Enix.
Got my hands on Final Fantasy VII for the PS1. If you'd asked me back then what my favourite games were, I'd probably have said Crash Bandicoot 3, Ready to Rumble Boxing, or Action Man.
The 3 bad games on the console.
or some such. But that all changed when I inserted the first of FF7's 3 discs into my PlayStation. From there on, discovering
It was
a whole
over.
new world
It was totally
of
over.
possibilities.
Yep, it was
A
just,
game
we were
that
done. Sold,
significantly
sunk.
pushed the
Fucked,
boundaries
sprung.
of
We're
what I
sprung for
thought
life.
were possible with
Done.
gaming, drawing me into a
Fuck me where I lay. You know, I love Anthony Kiedis. One note from the song she wrote could fuck me where I lay. One note from the song she wrote would fuck me where I lay. One note from the song she wrote. One note could make me die. I like pledge bike with pain, and music is my aeroplane. It's my aeroplane.
massive but deep world filled with rich characters, a brilliant
Final Fantasy could just fuck me where I lay. Didn't even have to touch me. It was so sweet. Endless Grind, the first version of it. Thank God for endless anything, right? 7 never truly ends. You can just go out there and just keep grinding something, Gil or Magic. You could put, I mean, it ends. You probably couldn't spend 20 years there, but then they made 20 others.
based combat system, an impossibly good soundtrack, and more secrets and quests than you could shake a stick at. But I wanted more. I was left gasping for more.
Yeah.
And thankfully there was plenty more to come.
Yeah, Final
Of course,
Fantasy 8,
FF7
Final Fantasy
was followed by
9.
FF8. Though sadly it tries I might to really enjoy it, that game just never clicked with me.
I love that
Certainly
game.
not when compared to
Whatever.
its predecessor. And as for FF9, well, I've always considered it to be a thoroughly excellent and enchanting RPG, but again, it just didn't quite fully resonate with me. Certainly not.
It's because they didn't understand the junction system. So many of these idiots think that they're good at the games. They're not. They don't understand the junction system. And it's so easy. You get the most powerful item that you have, which is items, right? And you empower your favorite spell with all of the items that you have. And so if your favorite spell is Quetzalcoatl, the summon, you can put 99 Ultima magic spells behind the Quetzalcoatl summon, and it becomes like not the most powerful summon in history, but it becomes like this off the chart thing that'll kill the game boss in one hit. And that's the junction system. Put 75 Phoenix Downs behind a Cure 3, and you're looking at a pretty good cure. You know? Put 75 Cure 3s behind a Cure 4, and you have a really, really good Cure 4. And it is hard. Granted, it is hard to understand the junction system. But, I mean, all it is just apply physical items to one single item, and the power of all those physical items improves the power of the item that you applied it to. That's the junction system. And so it gives you a reason to stack 99 potions, because then you can stack the 99 potions in the junction system behind Cure 1, and now you've got a Cure 1 empowered by 99 potions. And the potions don't go anywhere, but they represent power as items, and the items improve the power of your spells, and the spells become stronger. And so it gives you a reason to farm all of those items and do all of those random battles over and over and over and over and over again, because you can just keep junctioning Knights of the Round over and over and over again until it's like you get your strongest spell and your second strongest spell, and you empower your first strongest spell with all of your second strongest spells. And the spells are like scrolls, as I recall. Like, you can't use them up, but they are stacked. They do stack. They come in like scrolls, as I recall. It's kind of a weird system, but it definitely was good. It was like really genuinely good. The story wasn't genuinely good, but the rest of it was. The love story was good, I would say. I really liked the characters. The music was exquisite. The music was the best part. Graphics were okay, better than 7. The open world was better than 7. Graphics were better than 7. And the music, to a degree, I think was probably better than 7. Story was not good like 7. Not at all. Not even remotely. No offense to whoever wrote Final Fantasy VIII. They're apples and melons. Not even apples and oranges. They're apples and melons. Where is my fucking staff? There we go. I heard you over there. I think you're a mob, right? Yeah, you are. A lot of fishing today. It's because it's raining. I have an entire stack of oily blackmouth. You know how much money that is? It's fucking awesome. It's actually worth doing, too. The fishing's worth more than farming is. It's awesome. I love that. All the Asian people were like, we're sick of being fucking devalued for our love of fishing and all the fish being worth nothing. And I am, too. I'm fucking sick of it. 20 years of white people, and they want to drive the price of fish down to nothing. I've never understood it. Fish is not easy to get. Fishing is not easy. It's not easy. It's not fast. It's not easy. It's not cost productive. It's not cheap. You know, fishing is not easy. And you guys act like fish should be devalued. They should never be. They're like the slowest thing in the game that you can do. You know? So they should have a lot of value. And I like that I can see that the under my consortium is mostly Asian in its sensibilities, and so they're controlling the markets in the background with all of the boosting and the gold sales and the RMT that's going to people like Asmongold when they boost their characters, right? And so with that Asian sensibility comes some sense in the market. I mean, they run the bots, so they do the pricing, and they don't want fish devalued, and I don't either.
The asteroid
I follow on the same line with them on that. You can tell they have made efforts to make sure that the fishing does not get devalued because they don't want to fish. The easiest way for a bot to get caught is fishing, right? If you're fishing and you're botting, 5 dudes end up standing around you, yelling at you, being like, fuck you, bot, and reporting you over and over again, right? They can tell you're a bot right away. If you spend longer than 5 hours sitting there, they'll talk to you, and if you don't respond, they're going to be like, fucking bot, you fucking bot, and report. Happened to me during SoD in the first week. And not to me, but like, you know, I helped the guy report a bot, and we got him banned out of there. And so they don't like bot fishing. It's really obvious unless you hide well, and even then there's people who look for it. So who are like bot hunters. So like, you know, so one of the things that they did for us, I would say, is they decided to stay out of the fish market. They control the pricing on it, and they resell all the fish, but they don't like, you know, but they don't control the pricing on it. So it's still one of the few ways that a non-botting gringo can still make money in this game, you know. I'm not a gringo. I'm just talking about like I'm a gringo to their fucking bot scene, and I don't want to be part of it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know shit about bots, and I don't want to. I know how to catch them. I know how to spot them. I know how to kill them, and I know how to get them banned, and I know what they look like, and I know how they smell, and I know how they move, but I don't know anything about how they do what they do, and that's fine by me.
To FF7. But then, ladies and gentlemen, in 2001, we got Final Fantasy X for the PS2, which gave me exactly what I craved. A new cast of incredible characters. One of the most...
You know, I would not mind, while we're on the
game.
subject, I would not mind taking a look at purchasing Final Fantasy VIII Pixel Remaster, and I think the sale just ended, of course, right when I finally found a game that I actually want to buy. But we'll go look. Final Fantasy VIII. I wish 14 was good. God damn it. There's 8 remastered. Yeah, I want 8 remastered. When was this released? It was in 2019. Remastered, huh? Cool. What else does it do? It gives battle assist options, HP, ATB gauge, and limit break boosts. Game speed boosts, which is good. That's what I'm after. No random encounters. Interesting. You can just do the story without the combat unless you don't want it, huh? I mean, I guess the bosses probably kick your ass, so you can just turn off the random encounters when you don't want them, so you can walk somewhere without being interrupted. I like that. Obtain all items and abilities, max GF levels, that's the junction system. Currency and spells, obtain all limit breaks and cards. So it has cheats in it, but it's not... so how much do you want for this? It's $20, which is honestly what it's worth. I love Square Enix. They have problems, but they aren't dumb. I wouldn't say you could ever accuse that they were dumb. Playing Triad again would be so fun. I love this game. Oh, the love story was so good. Would I actually play the game is the real problem. I don't know. Turn-based. It's cool in the respect that I think it's got an auto battler, but I mean... This is the druid I killed? The hell? He like logged? Look, this is that druid I killed. He's right here. After I killed him, he just logged. Well, I mean, he walked up and started fishing my point. Like, what? I mean, okay, maybe he just had to go. He was like, fucking, I'm just gonna log. Okay. Hope I didn't make that guy's day bad. But he walked up and started fishing for my fucking fishing spot. And it's the opposite faction. What does he think was gonna happen? I buffed up. I let him know he was doing it. I went stealth 3 feet away from him. I let him know I was coming. He didn't get out of the way. When I see piss coming, I get out the way. I don't like rake. Mango. I need hit. I need like melee hit. This 29 dude is gonna kill me. Wow! God damn it. Why are all the mobs 5 levels higher? That's so dumb. Why did you do that? Why did you design it like this? Why do I keep aggroing level 29s? This is stupid. Should have gone bear. I need this fucking rune. I take too much damage without it. Well, I'm working on it. I'm getting the gold up slowly. I should go join... This will be fun. Do public raid. Building the king. Why? Oh, because of that. Yeah. 6 days. Not bad. I can fuck around and move at my own pace here.
game, that being the Wand of Spira, a soundtrack that I still to this day consider to be the single greatest soundtrack of all time for anything ever. More satisfying and extra flashy turn-based combat, now with an extra emphasis on slow strategy rather than the more time-based systems of the previous games, and a boatload of quests, side quests and secrets. Yes, Final Fantasy X. Yes! But this video isn't about those Final Fantasy games, or the ones which came before it, or even the one which came directly after it, because I haven't played it. But rather, this video is about Final Fantasy XII. As you can imagine, with me being such a rabid fan of FF10, my hype and anticipation for a new Final Fantasy game was off the bloody charts. I was practically frothing at the mouth. But the fact remains that I was also in my mid-teens, and therefore was also something of a dumb moron. And so when I discovered that this new game in the franchise was ditching Final Fantasy tradition to now have all battles play out in the field instead of the usual flashy random encounters followed by some tasty turn-based combat, I went on the rampage. I rampaged around my room, knocking over small objects. Such was my fury. I didn't stop there though, oh no. I found out that a buddy of mine had got on the game right when it came out, and he invited me over so that I could see what it was all about, and again, like a dumbass, I didn't even give it a chance. I saw him roaming around the Ester Sand, felling wolves and toppling cactites, and I scoffed. Such was my scorn for this new change in the way battles played out. Even the sight of a wild saurian prowling through the desert did little to arouse me. Or if it did, I was too stubborn to admit it, even to myself. And thus, by the time I left my friend's house that night, I was, if anything, more put off with the new direction that Final Fantasy seemed to have taken. It wasn't really based on anything solid or logical, I was just too in love with what I already knew, and instead of being open to new things, I simply wanted more of the same. And also, I'll say it once more, I was a moron. The charms of Final Fantasy XII would not elude me forever, however, because many months later I saw a copy of the game for sale second hand, and I thought, hey, what the hell, let's give it a shot. And upon actually playing it for myself, it only took about 5 minutes for me to realise that I'd been completely wrong about everything. Because folks, I'll tell you now, I absolutely love Final Fantasy XII. In fact, my 3 favourite games in the franchise are 7, 10 and 12. The Dark Souls trilogy, Bloodborne, Sekiro and Elden Ring would later very much sweep me off my feet, of course, with those games being the main focus of my channel, but before all that my heart belonged to Final Fantasy and no other. I always knew I'd make a retrospective on FF12 someday, but the time never quite felt right, and to be honest, a reason for that is that I was a bit intimidated, because make no mistake, this is a big game with a hell of a lot of content, but you know what? The time finally does feel right, and I'm excited as hell to talk at length about one of my favourite ever games. A game that I've put several hundred hours into, drinking in its story, wandering its levels, vanquishing marks, collecting loot, completing quests, defeating powerful bosses, collecting espers, acquiring rare weapons, and all the other fun and engaging activities presented within its expansive, wonderful world, throughout the land of EvE, a land of warring kingdoms and empires, acting as the backdrop to a story of destruction, subjugation, power and revenge. It is the Zodiac Age version of the game I'll be speaking about here, which gave it a shiny new coat of paint and brought over a lot of tweaks and changes compared to the vanilla version on PS2. The International Zodiac Job System version did of course make these changes first back in 2007, but with it having been a Japanese exclusive release, the Zodiac Age remaster was most fans' first opportunity to experience these changes, several of which I'll discuss throughout the video. Folks, if you find yourself enjoying this retrospective, hey, why not subscribe to the channel? I make fun videos about great games. And lastly, before I begin, please allow me to give a fond thank you to my kind patrons for their support for the channel. And with all that being said, let's get into it. So I shall start by discussing the background of the world of Final Fantasy XII before covering the story events up to around the midpoint of Nalbanet Dungeon. I'll also introduce and discuss the game's key characters and party members as they appear in the story, giving my thoughts on it all before delving into the game's many other elements before circling back to the story towards the end of the video. Final Fantasy XII is set in the world of EvE, or at least a particularly large part of it. Of course, it wasn't the first FF game to take place in EvE, with Final Fantasy Tactics released for the PlayStation in 1997 also being set there, though with different rival characters and factions, though my first introduction to this world was FF12. The two most significant powers in EvE are the Rosarian Empire to the west and the Arcadian Empire to the east, but situated in between these two superpowers are the smaller kingdoms of Nebradia and Dalmasca. And several years before the events of the beginning of the game, there was also the kingdom of Landis, which would be swallowed up by the Arcadian Empire. We don't know exactly where Landis lay on EvE map, but the game doesn't take long in acquainting the player with two of its former citizens, those being Basch von Ronsenborg, who after Landis' annexation would go on to serve and defend the royalty of Dalmasca, and his brother Noah, who would go on to serve as a judge for the Empire. However, Landis was not to be where the Empire's appetite stopped, because their westward advancement continued into Nebradia, a peaceful land whose prince had recently joined in marriage to the princess of its neighbouring land, Ashelia Benargan Dalmasca. The game begins with scores of allied soldiers defending Nalbina Fortress located on Nebradia's border, led by the prince and Captain Basch so as to repel the invading empire. This is a result of the Empire attacking Nebradia's capital, Nabudis. Although you don't actually see the events at Nabudis take place, or get much information on what exactly happened at this early stage in the game, the destruction of Nabudis is a very significant event in the game's story, having ramifications on the Empire's actions and ambitions for years to come, because rather than the downfall of the capital coming about purely as a result of conventional military actions, both it and the surrounding region were obliterated by a mist explosion brought about by an artifact called the Midlight Shard, a type of deifacted nethicite, with the term deifacted meaning made by the gods, and nethicite being a special stone designed to absorb mist energy. Mist itself is a very mysterious force in this game, and in fact there are a great many very mysterious aspects and entities in the world of Final Fantasy XII, but suffice to say, Mist can be thought of as a powerful, mystical form of energy, capable of facilitating incredible acts of magic and, as seen in Nabudis, devastating acts of mass destruction. Thus, with the fall of Nabudis, Nebradia's next point of defence was Nalbina Fortress, also under attack by the Empire, but alas, the remaining military might of Dalmasca and Nebradia was not sufficient to hold back the greater numbers and technological superiority of the Empire, and the fortress fell, though not before the tragic death of Prince Rasler, leaving the princess a widow. As a result of Nebradia's defeat, and with no hope of overcoming the overwhelming forces threatening Dalmasca, who was next in line for invasion, King Raminis would agree to sign a peace treaty which would allow his kingdom to retain some semblance of sovereignty, though one which would ultimately be a puppet of Arcadia. This is the point where the player first gets control, playing as a young Dalmascan soldier named Rex, led by Captain Basch and his men, who have arrived in the now Arcadian-controlled Nalbina Fortress, which was agreed to be where King Raminis would sign the peace treaty, except Basch and his allies suspect treachery, believing the king to be in great danger. The captain splits off from Rex at one point and runs off ahead to the king, leaving Rex to take care of a few pursuing Imperial soldiers, but upon Rex making it to the hall where the signing was to take place, everyone is dead, including the king, and what's more, the culprit seems to have been Captain Basch himself. At this point, a key figure in FF12's story enters the picture, that being Vayne Solidor, one of the two remaining sons of the leader of the Empire, Emperor Gramus. He states to Basch that with the king being dead, the peace negotiations are now ruined, and with it, Dalmasca's sovereignty. And of course, Rex is here to witness this all from a state of semi-consciousness. Thus, with Dalmasca's king dead, and with reports that the princess had succumbed to her grief and, Arcadia would continue their westward advancement through Nebradia and into Dalmasca, and from the testimony of Rex, who seemed to see it all go down, the people of Dalmasca blamed their captain Basch, believing him to be a traitor, guilty of the highest of treasons, now said to have been put to death by the Empire. And all these events lead up to the current situation in Dalmasca, and in particular the royal capital of Rabanastre, where the game truly begins 2 years later. The main-ish character of Final Fantasy XII is Van, the younger brother of the now deceased Rex, who passed away sometime after telling people of Basch's betrayal. Van's point of view gives the player a good idea of how life currently is in Dalmasca, because While we didn't get to experience what life was like before Arcadia took control, current conditions are far from ideal. There are brutish Imperial soldiers everywhere. All laws and rules are now dictated by the Empire, and citizens of Rabanastre live in fear of speaking out against their oppression, lest they be thrown into Narmina dungeon and left to rot. Van himself is essentially an orphan, living off the paltry sums of guilt he pilfers from unwitting Imperials. Also, he can feed himself and the scores of younger orphan children left abandoned after their parents were killed in the war, or imprisoned by the Empire for crimes real or imagined. As such, Van detests the Empire for taking everything from him, and in fact this bitterness is shared by near all Dalmascans, young and old, most of whom have suffered in some way because of the power-hungry westward advancement of the Arcadian Empire. Van's main ambition, however, is to become a sky pirate. Like just about every Final Fantasy game, airships are a thing here, in a big way, and FF12 boasts some particularly bloody big ones, making up formidable sky fleets which play key roles in the militaries of the nations of Ivalice. But in addition to these fleets, there are also sky pirates, non-military airships manned by adventurers who search the land for treasures, and above all things, Van wants his own airship so as to soar into the sky, up and away from the rules and the oppression in favour of boundless freedom. I know I said that the main character is Van, but actually, not really.
Not really.
It's just that the game really
It's
makes
the
you think
whole
the
party.
focus is going to be on him because of the way
Because it
he's
starts with
introduced.
him.
You think,
Yeah.
here's our new Cloud, our Squall, our Zidane,
Nope.
our
Nope.
Titus. But if it's
Nope.
12,
I like
actually
the girls in that
different
game a lot
because
more, and
rather
they're
than there being
definitely
one main character and then a cast of great side characters along for the ride, as is usually the case in Final Fantasy games, I'd say about half of your main party of 6 can be considered main characters, while the other 3 receive varying amounts of attention and development. To be honest, just a bit into the game, even Van kinda transitions into something of a side character, especially when compared to Ash and Balthier. I'll talk about those two characters a bit later though. The second party member encountered is Penelo, Van's friend and a fellow orphan of Dalmasca. As such, she also resents the Empire, though not quite so vigorously as Van, being more preoccupied with taking care of herself and her friends by doing odd jobs and good deeds, as opposed to common thievery. One character she helps out a lot is a banga named Miguelo, the owner of an item shop called Miguelo's Sundries in Rabanastre's East End.
Fine chocobo you have there. Yes, cedar down stock if I'm not mistaken. Change the soil, change the chocobo, am I right? Yes, different soil means different bouquet too. Take a Dalmascan Barrow's wine, it may lack the flavor and depth of some of your Arcadian wines, but it has a certain strength of character. It's not bad really once you get used to it. Care for some, sirs? There's more than enough for all to cool their throats, of course.
I've always absolutely loved the voice acting for Miguel. It just makes me smile to listen to him talk. And no bloody wonder, because as I only just realised on my most recent playthrough of the game, he's voiced by John DiMaggio, who also
John
voiced
DiMaggio,
Phoenix in Gears of
Simpsons
War,
and-
Bender in Futurama, Waka
Yep.
in FF10, and a ton of other stuff. Penelo's role throughout the game is essentially
He's
to
very
try and
famous.
moderate Van's recklessness, encouraging pragmatism and responsibility over his wild ambitions, though again the focus on her narratively really dims from about 25% of the way through the story onwards. She gets a fair amount of screen time early on, but then for most of the game after that she may as well not be there, which can feel a wee bit jarring, like she should have had that bit more development and interaction with the other characters from the midpoint onwards, but then she just doesn't. Even so, I still do like her and her strange outfit and quickening animations. Not long after running around Rabanastre a bunch and completing a few odd jobs, a big event is held to welcome the capital's new consul, Vayne Solidor, the same man who Rex saw speaking to the traitor Bash directly after King Ramanas's assassination. With the general sentiment in Rabanastre being one of intense loathing for the Empire, the crowds of citizens initially regard Vayne with scepticism and hostility, but after a rousing speech about peace and endeavouring to defend Dalmasca, etc., the crowd goes wild and you think, hey, maybe this Vayne guy won't be so bad, I'd sure like to kiss him on the lips. He's even nice to Miguelo, but spoiler alert, no. He's not a good guy at all, and does absolutely nothing to help or improve conditions in Dalmasca whatsoever. In fact, he makes literally everything much, worse, intentionally. Vayne Solidor is Final Fantasy XII's main antagonist. His character and true nature get expanded on as the game progresses, which I'll discuss more later on, but suffice to say for now, for a Final Fantasy antagonist, he's kinda grounded in a sense. There's nothing flamboyant about him, and whenever he speaks it's in a calm, refined manner, giving him a distinctly cold, psychopathic statesman type vibe, which, while not being as entertaining or badass as the likes of Kefka, Sephiroth or Seymour, still make for a very intriguing character, though certainly not the most memorable. Van, however, has a plan, that being to sneak into the palace while everyone is distracted by the festivities, so as to nab himself some treasure to go towards the purchase of an airship, putting him one step closer towards becoming a sky pirate, though as ever, Penelo counsels against any dangerous acts against the Empire, and as ever, her counsel goes unheeded as Van enacts his plan, travelling through Garamside's waterway beneath the city to infiltrate into the palace with the aid of a magic stone given to him by his friend Dallin, who lives in Lowtown, where Rabanastor's especially impoverished and downtrodden reside. After fighting through swarming multitudes of bats, rats and even a rare species of fish in one place, Van makes it into the palace to where gaggles of servants toil away to ensure the feast above runs smoothly, and, with the help of a nearby Sikh, manages to make it up the stairs past the guard in what might be the dumbest minigame I've ever played, and the stealth shenanigans only continue on from there. I'll talk more about the game's world and levels further on, but it often throws in various level specific mechanics and minigame type activities to make different places feel distinctive, and you get a taste of that here, where you have to lure out the guards to alter their positions so as to allow you to progress further towards the location of the treasure. Again though, it's kinda clumsily done. I mean, the objective is to avoid the guards, yet you can just walk directly in their line of sight in several places. As long as you don't get right up in their grill, they won't do shit. Van does make it to where old Dallin instructed him to go though, using the Crescent Stone to open the way into the treasury, bringing him directly to an ancient relic of Dalmascan royalty, at this point known only as the goddess's Magicite, though a bit later on in the game its true name becomes revealed, that being the Dusk Shard, one of 3 known deifacted Nethersites, with his counterparts being the aforementioned Midlight Shard, responsible for the devastation at Nabudis, and the Dawn Shard, which lies guarded in King Wraithwall's distant tomb. Wraithwall was known as the Dynast King, a king who, with the favour of the gods, conquered vast territories in Ivalice, uniting them all into one peaceful kingdom, known as the Galtean Alliance. Wraithwall gifted the Dusk Shard to House Dalmasca, to forever signify that the Damascan royal family were descendants of the Dynast King, and the same gesture was done unto House Nebradia, giving them the Midlight Shard, where the Dawn Shard was kept secluded and well guarded. I wouldn't say that FF12's plot is super complex or anything, but if you're not paying attention, it's very easy to be left confused by the names of all the kingdoms and kings and relics and continents and such, many of which sound kinda similar. Not even an hour into the game and you're hit with Nebradia, Nalbina and Nabudis, and it can get a bit discombobulating. Back to Van and the palace though, because right as he steals the treasure, which as far as he knows at that point is simply that, treasure, not one but 2 of the game's other party members are introduced, Fran and Balthier, who also have an eye for the treasure. Not only this though, but this happens to be the night where the Dalmascan resistance have chosen to launch an attack on the palace. See, while the Arcadians do occupy Dalmasca, there are still insurgency cells dotted around the land who receive funding from unknown sources, strategically striking out at the Empire at what seem like opportune times, though on this particular night, the Arcadian military seem to have been anticipating an attack, with the enormous airship Ifrit already there and poised for defence. FF12 features many monster staples of Final Fantasy like Flans, Behemoths, Malboros and much more, though there's also some which do not appear in the traditional sense but which are still referenced, specifically in the names of airships. Like in the tutorial level you fight a small aircraft with the codename Tonbury, and the game's largest airships are given names of notable summons from the previous games like Ifrit, Shiva, Leviathan and much later into the game even Bahamut. Van joins forces with Fran and Balthier to escape the havoc, making it back to Garen's waterway so as to return to Rabanastor's surface. And it's very nice to have some extra company here because Balthier is absolutely my favourite party member and one of the best characters in the game, though there is 2 or 3 others I enjoy even more. Balthier is exactly what Van aspires to be, a sky pirate, with his own enormous airship with which he travels freely throughout EvE, getting into all manner of scrapes and adventures towards the goal of collecting treasures.
That's what I would do in a Final
loot.
Fantasy
At
universe.
this
I'm
point, there's really
Setzer.
nothing more told
He was
to you
Setzer.
about his
Yeah, I
past,
love
though
Setzer.
later events in the game reveal that he
I
had a
related
very
to Setzer
different
when I was
previous
like
life.
10
Though I guess the
or
fact that
whatever.
he has an English accent might be a bit of a giveaway
12.
at this point, because if you haven't noticed yet, Dalmascans all have American accents and the Arcadian Imperials are all English. I guess because a refined English accent lends itself well to sounding more evil and stuff. I don't know. Like I said earlier, a bit into the game, Van kinda steps out of the spotlight to give way to other characters, and Balthier is certainly one of those characters. He gets screen time, dialogue and meaningful interactions with the other party members, and he has a very enjoyable character arc where he gradually evolves from a greedy, treasure-hungry sky pirate into someone far more concerned with making a difference and fighting back against the Empire and such. Though the thing that makes it all so enjoyable is how great his voice acting is.
You're sky pirates? So
You're
you
sky
haven't heard of
pirates?
Balthier.
Balthier.
Listen, thief.
Listen,
Van,
thief.
If you ever want to see your home again, you'll do exactly as I say. Myself, Fran, and you, we're working together now. Understood?
Although it's a rather ridiculous thing for a 31-year-old man to say, I think Balthier's really cool and suave with wry, dry and witty dialogue.
Me too.
Always sounding refined, collected and intelligent. Any cutscene is instantly made more enjoyable when Balthier's there, and as you learn more about him, he just becomes more interesting and likeable. As for Fran, she's the only non-human in the party, being of a race of wood-dwelling beings known as the Viera. The Viera are one of the more rarely seen races throughout EvE, though I think the Numo are probably the rarest because you really don't see very many of them at all. And as for the Gareth, you literally don't see any of them outside their village of Jahara, located in Osmond Plains on the Kurwan continent. Fran is also a very cool character, but in a very different way to Balthier, being far less verbose and far more serious, and speaking in such a way so as to deliver the maximum amount of meaning and depth with the smallest number of words. Regarding the serious aspect of her personality, I don't think you see her crack a smile a single time in the whole game, though a good reason for her severe nature is that she's actually an outcast. You visit the Viera a good bit further into the game, residing in Eryut village, hidden within the green depths of Dolmore jungle, but it quickly becomes clear that they detest outsiders, particularly humans. Furthermore, the Viera have a unique connection to the woods, and as such believe that all Viera should remain there their whole lives, with the punishment for venturing outside being banishment, which is exactly what happened to Fran. Her relationship with Balthier is never explicitly explained, or how they even met, but they seem to be pretty, friendly.
Warp drive
I earlier
active.
spoke of my inexplicably shitty first impressions of FF12, but here's another for you. I used to hate Fran, and that's because of her accent, which as far as I know, sounds like no other accent on Earth. It's like the voice actress just created a new... It's like she just created a new accent for the character, which I genuinely think is extremely impressive. But yeah, for whatever reason, the accent used to annoy the shit out of me when I was younger. I don't know why, because I think it sounds great now.
I've heard the voice of the wood. She says Miern is not in the village.
I love her voice, yep.
Where has she gone?
Why do you ask? The wood tells us where she has gone. Or
Docking
can you
request
not hear her?
accepted.
It's not long before the team encounter yet another party member though, and probably the single most important one, Ash. She introduces herself as Amalia at first, but this is just a cautious pseudonym, being that she happens to be part of the Resistance's current attack on the palace, but as gets revealed just a bit later, her real name is Ashelia Benargin Dalmasca, the only remaining member of the Dalmascan royal family, who turns out to
BRB.
have faked her own death, or rather her uncle, Halim Ondor, Marquis of Bujerba, falsely announced that she was dead, which the Empire assumed to be the truth. Although the first character we play as after the tutorial level is Van, who we also always control when wandering through towns and such, most of the plot actually revolves around Ash and her attempts to restore herself as Dalmasca's rightful ruler, though at the same time she also has ambitions towards fierce revenge against the Empire, even towards its destruction. And no wonder when they were responsible for the death of her father and husband, the loss of her rightful title as princess, and the subjugation of her people. The reason I discussed the deifacted Nethicite before is that they are key to Final Fantasy XII's story. It's all set within a world at war, featuring massive empires of enormous military might and smaller kingdoms caught in the midst, and the situation develops and unfolds dramatically and intricately as the game progresses, with the player being kept abreast of changes to the larger international situation via Marquis Ondor's interludes, and from the dialogue of key figures from the houses of each empire, like Al Cid Margrace from the ruling family of Rosaria, and young Larsa Solidor from House Solidor in Arcades, a land governed by both Emperor and Senate. However, as I said, this larger conflict is the setting, the stage with which a somewhat more personal story is told of Ash's destiny, her loyal friends and followers, and whether she will give into the inner lust for power and revenge against Arcadia. After fighting through the beasts and bosses of Garamscythe Waterway, the party emerge back up into Lowtown, where they are swiftly apprehended by Imperials, whereupon Ash is taken away, and as for Van, Fran and Balthier, they are thrown into the dreaded Nalbina dungeon, whilst Penelo protests in Defan's defence, all to no avail. The dungeon is of course located in Nalbina, a fortress formerly belonging to Nabradia, but which now belongs to the Empire, serving as a point of defence at its surface and in its depths as a dungeon, home not only to criminals, but also to innocent civilians who either happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, or who dare to speak out against the Empire. It is indeed pretty goddamn grim down here, and although there are a lot of prisoners you can talk to, they don't even have names, instead just being known by their numbers, and in some cases by the distinctive iron collars and bracelets around their body. After a fight with a particularly savage gang of Sikhs, the action comes to a halt as a judge enters into the picture, Judge Gabranth. Judges are highly distinguished figures of the Empire who act as magisters of the law, protectors of House Solidor and the Senate, and even generals who command the Imperial army. Although you do come across some lesser judges on occasion, strictly when in combat, there are 6 particularly powerful and influential named judges, those being Judge Geese, Judge Gabranth, Judge Bergen, Judge Drace, Judge Zargabath and Judge Zect, the one who commanded the attack on Nabu Dis, resulting in its annihilation by the Midlight Shard. Honestly, some of my favourite cutscenes in the whole game and of any Final Fantasy game are those where you get to see the judges in action. They already look incredibly badass in their heavy armour, each having their own uniquely shaped helmet, but their dialogue and voice acting is incredible. The dialogue in FF12 is delightfully refined. I hesitate to go so far as to call it Shakespearean, but many characters, especially those from the Imperial side of things, speak in such a stylish way which manages to come across as dramatic while still being dry, grounded and mature, especially when compared to my other favourite Final Fantasy games. I mean, FF10 is one of my favourite games of all time, but its characters sometimes said some stupid fucking cheesy nonsense, which is great, I love it, but FF12's characters in comparison are much less full of that wacky cheer, which isn't necessarily better, but rather is simply a different flavour of excellence. The judges also vary a great deal in their personalities, and although the Empire's actions against peaceful neighbouring countries is abhorrent, things aren't presented in a simple black and white way at all. Judge Geese is power hungry and ambitious, seeming to possess very little empathy for others, and holding little mercy for anyone or anything even remotely standing in the way of the Empire, while Judge Zargabath is painted as someone who carries out the brutal commands of his superiors dutifully though without any pleasure, clearly knowing some of his actions are immoral, but knowing that the easiest and safest path is that of obedience. Then you have the unyielding and brutal Judge Bergen, who shows no mercy for the foes of the Empire, even expressing the wish that the kingdom of Dalmasca be wiped off the mat and forgotten to herald in the new age of Nethicite.
It controls him as it did Miern.
No, the power of manufactured Nethicite is the power of man, a weapon forged by his wisdom who would challenge the gods themselves. A fitting blade for a true dynast king. Wraithwall did but pretend the title, a cur begging Nethicite scraps from his master's table. Hark! Evilise hails her true dynast king, Vayne Solidor. He shall defy the will of the gods and see the reins of history back in the hands of man. His time is nigh! The new Evilise holds no place for the name Dalmasca. The stain of Wraithwall's blood shall be washed clean from history's weave.
But then on the other end, you have Judge Drace, who seems to be the most moral of all the judges, openly pondering about the morality of the Empire's recent actions, and even directly confronting Vayne Solidor at around the halfway point of the game, where he becomes increasingly bold and ambitious, grasping harder at the reins of power and enacting ever more merciless and immoral schemes. The most significant of all the judges though is Gabranth. In fact, it's actually Judge Gabranth himself who appears on the game's box art. You only hear his voice here as he admonishes the Banga bounty hunter Begamnin, who's on the hunt for our very own Balthier, but further on in the dungeon, while searching for a way out of Nalbina, the party comes across a familiar face, that of
Captain Bosch von Rotzenburg of Dalmasca.
Shut up, man. It's Captain Bosch von Rotzenburg of Dalmasca, who was supposed to have been executed by the Empire but still lives, just like how Ash is wrongly believed to have died. As well as seeing Bash, we also see the face of Judge Gabranth, who is in fact Bash's identical twin. And at this point it clicks into place that it was not the captain who assassinated King Raminis at the treaty signing, but rather Gabranth who pretended to be Bash, all in the sight of the wounded Rex, who would go on to testify that Bash was the traitor and the one to blame for Dalmasca's downfall. At this point though, Van doesn't yet comprehend all these plot intricacies, and so does this.
Dalmasca? What do you care about Dalmasca? Everything that's happened is because of you! Everyone that's died, every single one! Even my brother.
But then later on he realises the truth and says this.
Really, it's alright. I know it wasn't your fault. I see that now. You didn't kill my brother.
All good then. Bash is the final of the game's 6 main party members to join the team. You don't have all 6 in the party at this point, with Ash still being held by the Imperials and Penelo soon to be spirited away to the sky city of Bujerba by Begamnin and his crew. But from the point of the events aboard the Leviathan airship with Judge Geese onwards, you have all 6 members and none of them ever leave again from that point on, with the exception of the game's 3 guest characters, those being Vosler, a former ally of Bash and a member of the Resistance, Larsa, younger son of Emperor Gramis and brother to Vayne Solidor, and my personal favourite, the man with the pink shorts, Redis, though as with several of FF12's characters, he has an alternate identity of some significance. Back to Bash though, he's a soldier through and through, a loyal protector of Dalmasca and servant of the royal family, who now only consists of Ash. As I mentioned earlier though, Bash is not a Dalmascan, instead originally hailing from the fallen kingdom of Landis. But despite being a foreigner, his honour and loyalty towards Dalmasca is completely unwavering throughout the whole game. As a character he's very serious and never flippant, but in a likeable enough way. He doesn't exactly have the most personality on the team, but instead his personality literally is honour and duty and not all that much else. And as such, he doesn't really have much of a character arc. He starts off as a steadfast and loyal knight and remains that way throughout the whole game. But that's not to say that he's bad or uninteresting, because he complements the greater team dynamic rather well. And also his adversarial relationship with his brother Judge Gabranth makes for some great moments. Another very significant character in FF12's story who I simply must mention here, even though you don't encounter him much further into the game, is Sidolphus Demon Bonanza, or Dr. Sid for short. Of course there's a character named Sid, it's a Final Fantasy game, but in the case of FF12, Sid is not one of the good guys at all, but rather is something of a mad scientist and Vayne Solidor's greatest ally. His main focus is the Nethicite, both manufactured and deifacted, and how they can be used to further the might of the Empire, though his main ambition, as both he and Vayne, not to mention Judge Bergen, often state, is to place the reins of history back in the hands of man. It's not entirely clear what these powerful men of the Empire mean by this at first, but it gradually becomes
Wow.
revealed as the game progresses, and as the party venture to some of the more mysterious and mist-soaked locations in the game, gaining an audience with wise leaders, fierce espers, and even the gods themselves, all towards restoring Dalmasca and stopping the Empire one way or another. Well, now that I've introduced the party members and set up for the story, I'm going to put the plot discussion on hold for now, because there's a lot of other stuff to talk about. But for now, let's talk about the world of FF12. I know I covered Ivalice's history and political divisions and such earlier, but that's got nothing to do with how we, the player, move through it. Of course, you start off as Rex, but that's really just to teach you the absolute basics, such as, do you see the icon above my head? That's a talk icon. You can talk to any character showing one of these. Hey, thanks Bash. The real Final Fantasy XII experience doesn't start until you get control of Van, though even at this point you're still pretty damn restricted on where you can and can't go. Even so, you've got a portion of Rabanastre to explore, not to mention the first segment of the Dalmascan Estersand, an expansive beast-filled desert located just to the east of the royal capital, complemented by the Westersand at the other end, and then to the south there's Giza Plains, which is also the border between Dalmasca and Caer 1. That's just the immediate Dalmascan area I'm talking about, because there are far more cities, ports, dungeons and deserts to explore as the story unfolds, and as more of Ivalice becomes accessible by the use of the airship, or, as is mostly the case, simply by traversing there on foot, after which that region can be accessed at will via a teleport stone at a red save crystal. Honestly, there's a lot of stuff I love about Final Fantasy XII, but perhaps its single strongest aspect is its world, the way you explore it, the way it's presented, the sheer visual variance of any one location when compared to another, and the way so much of it feels so naturally interconnected. Let's take it all a bit at a time though. Let's take Rabanastre, where Van's adventure begins. Now, I haven't played every Final Fantasy game, I haven't played the MMOs, and nor have I gotten round to FF16, though I did enjoy the demo, but from what I have played, I think Rabanastre might just be Square Enix's best city. It's large, bright, bustling, filled with life and energy, it's structurally believable, it has a very distinctive style, and it isn't static, and that last aspect is extra relevant when talking about FF12, because it's also the case for nearly all of its cities and outposts. I don't mean it isn't static as in the form of the city changes, but rather whenever a major event in the story occurs, nearly every NPC has completely different dialogue, providing more insight into what regular people think of current events, with these points of view differing depending on whether you're speaking to a Rabanastran, an Arcadian, an acolyte of Mount Bar Omises, or a Viera secluded in their woods. Right from the get-go, there are an overwhelming number of people to talk to, though if you're unsure about how to talk to them, please refer back to the earlier lessons taught by Captain Bash. Just the fact that there's a ton of people to talk to isn't impressive on its own, because it's the quality that counts, not the quantity, but as I alluded to earlier, the dialogue in this game is exceptionally well written, and that doesn't just extend to the main characters and cutscenes, but also the merchants in the Muthru Bazaar, the day drinkers down at the local pub, or the bedraggled urchins running around in Lowtown. Not sure if anyone else is the same here, but I sometimes have to make a conscious effort not to speak to every single person I see when wandering around the city, otherwise my journey time when walking from one side to the other can easily be made twofold. I'm saying all this about Rabanastre as if these qualities are unique to it, but you can say much the same about the sky city of Bujerba, Arcades, Nalbina and Balfenheim Port, not to mention the game's outposts located within larger, more dangerous field areas like the South Bank and the Estersand, though don't get me started about the recent goings on over at the North Bank village, the Nomad village at Giza Plains, which straight up gets deserted during the rain season. Then you have the Hunters Camp in the middle of Fawn Coast, Jahara located in Osmond Plains, the Babbling Vale in the Mosferin High West, etc. By the way, I love how the game just makes up its own words, like High West, Still Shrine and Nectar Hall. These aren't real words, but they sound good, and I know exactly what they mean upon hearing them. Whenever I would get to a new remote location populated by shady bangas, cheerful Sikhs, suspicious Vieras, wise old Numos, stoic Garifs, or your plain old humans, be they Dalmascan, Bujerban or Arcadian, I couldn't wait to talk to them to learn more about Ivalice and about the different cultures and histories of these places, all of which feel very different from one another and with very different degrees of technological advancement. Take Rabanastor for example. You don't really see much technology here at all. In fact, it's like the people here are living in a different age. The clothing and architecture all have a somewhat Arabic flavour to them, and other than at the aerodrome, there are no airships or machines to be found, only a desert city populated by desert-dwelling people, though with the troubling presence of dark-armoured Imperial guards stationed at every street corner. Then you have the Sky City of Bujerba, which, thanks to the Marquis's cooperation with the Empire, not to mention the rich magicite veins found within Lozu mines, has thus far managed to remain in an uncomfortable alliance with the Empire, and thus is devoid of Imperial guards when compared to the far more oppressive conditions in Rabanastor. Whereas portions of the royal capital are nigh on impoverished, Bujerba is far more prosperous, with a very different culture, not to mention landscape. For a start, it's floating in mid-air thanks to its concentration of magicite ore, making for some incredible scenery, though the character of its alleys and architecture feels very distinct, being more cramped and even slightly confusing. It's not a large city, but if I don't look at my map when travelling through it, I will get lost, it's a guarantee. The Bujerbans even have their own dialect, occasionally throwing in odd italicized words where you need to infer their meaning, or just look up the wiki and learn these words off by heart and start using them in everyday conversation to impress your friends and family. You can go around to your buddy's house and say, "Badre, I apologise for the ha, but please fetch me a glass of Madu, why don't you? Otherwise, I will hereon consider you a Kasudra in this life and in the Nirvana." But then at the other end of the spectrum you've got Arcades, which interestingly enough itself ranges from one end of the spectrum of refinement to the other, with old Arcades down below being even more miserable and impoverished than Rabanastor's low town. Even the damn streets have depressing names. The Alley of Low Whispers and the Alley of Muted Sighs. Jesus, who named these places? This place sucks, and it's either where those born into poverty remain in poverty, or where the formerly rich and successful have come crashing down after making a figurative misstep and losing their status and wealth. As far as Arcades proper, well, it's by far the most impressive city in the game, but in a very different way to Rabanastor, because whereas Rabanastor is bright, simple, vibrant and filled with good cheer and personality even despite the Imperial occupation, Arcades is far more sterile and even dimmer, with the warm rays of the sun being blocked out by its towering skyscrapers, forming an impossibly large and complex city which, rather than looking historic, looks positively futuristic, complete with flying cars and numerous other strange obelisks and structures whose purpose can't even be guessed at. Seriously, the high resolution cutscenes showing Arcades are insane. This game has some incredible art direction, which is truly a joy to behold. As for the citizens of Arcades, well, their character also differs greatly when compared to the residents of the game's other main cities, but by that I mean that almost everyone here is unapologetically a massive. Everyone's stinking rich and successful with high social standings and connections, and yet they're some of the most bitter and jealous people in all EvE, and never satisfied with their lot, always looking up, though always eager to flex on those further down. Mind you, just like I said when discussing the judges, it's really not as black and white as Dalmasca equals completely good and Arcadia equals totally bad. When you eventually make it to Arcades, after a frankly absurdly long trek through Nalbina Fortress, to the Mosferin High Waste, then the Salika Wood, watch out for bombs, then through Fawn Coast, followed by a long trek through the Cheetah Uplands, complete with a descent down into the depths of Soshin Cave Palace, watch out for ambulatory plant life, and after ascending above the muted misery of old Arcades, your goal is to make it to Draklor Laboratory, located in the heart of the city. The problem is that to ride the cab service further into the city, you need to accumulate chops of wood, which effectively act as status-based currency which one Arcadian can choose to gift to another as a reward for a good deed. And with enough chops, even a beggar living in the squalor of old Arcades can rise to become a distinguished gentleman of status further above. Thus, most of Arcades actually serves as the arena for a tail-swapping minigame of sorts, where you have to listen to someone's problem and then find another person in the same area with a solution to that problem. For example, This researcher has decided that the time has come to leave the profession now that her team has completed a long-term project that her father had also been working on, but that she doesn't know how to let her father know. And so you commit the tale to memory, then find her father in the area and let him know, who then rewards you with a chop. It's kind of dumb, but I also really like it because, again, the writing's excellent and it gives you a great opportunity to drink in the flavour of Arcades proper to see how it compares to the rest of EvE. Some of the folk you encounter are very snobby with unrelatable, out-of-touch woes about wealth and status. Then there are others who are far more pleasant with real depth, and sometimes this depth comes out of nowhere. Like this woman who hates mummers with a passion, but then you find out that she and her family used to be dirt poor, with her mum or father barely even being able to put food on the table and falling into debt after becoming ill. At this point, a rich Arcadian came along and agreed to take on his debt so long as he agreed to leave the woman's mother, to which her mum or father agreed, knowing that they could have a better life without him. After which the rich Arcadian married her mother and she never saw her father again, leaving her resentful of mummers and their foolish prancing, all born out of sorrow for her lost father. Moments like this happen a lot in this game, which is why it's so important to wander its cities and outposts thoroughly, interacting with everyone, like this lone Vieira sitting shyly by the Muthru Bazaar, who you can converse with throughout the game, learning her story and watching her confidence and determination grow each time. Then there's the Jovi side quest, where each time you complete a hunt in Albany, this Sikh will show up and literally just snort, and then leave. And it's very difficult to interpret what that means. Is it a compliment or an insult? I don't know. But after beating all 5 Nalbina hunts, those being Atomos, Roblon, Goliath, Death Scythe and Carrot, you can see him sprinting around the West Ward section near the aerodrome, and if you talk to him, turns out the reason he kept cropping up was because Van has become his new hero after watching him dispatch some of the fiercest monsters in the land. Jovi actually had a previous hero, a Hume he'd known 4 years ago who saved him after he was caught stealing, but that this hero had since passed on after being involved in some way in the whole King Raminis assassination incident. Then before he leaves, he tells Van that he even looks like his old hero too, at which point it becomes clear that the old hero he's referring to was Van's deceased brother Rex. This wee quest and its associated dialogue are completely optional and quite missable, but honestly, for as humble as its presentation is when compared to all the game's grand cutscenes of massive sky battles, it's one of my favourite moments in the game, and an excellent example of how much personality the game's city sections have. Everything about them is rich. I can't praise FF12's cities and outposts highly enough. They do everything right and they're dense as hell, with Rabanastre being the star of the show for me, which I think is a big reason for why people were so disgusted when Final Fantasy XIII came along and completely dispensed with the whole city and settlement aspect in favour of linear corridors filled with enemies, almost none of which you could even return to after leaving them. I don't mean to take quick easy jabs at FF13 though, because it isn't the subject of this video, but god damn, apart from its graphics which to this day remain incredible, it was such a step back after the heights of its predecessor. People do talk about how that game gets a lot better around 60% of the way through, and I actually 100% agree with this, but funnily enough I think the reason for this is that it suddenly transitions into something that feels way more similar to FF12, with its big, bright, open environments, its roaming packs of monsters, and its submissions which effectively play out identically to FF12's hunts, and even the main dungeon you explore in Grand Pulse, Tajin's Tower, feels really similar to the Pharos at Ridorana from FF12. Anyway, I've gone off on a complete tangent there, so let's swiftly get back on track and say no more about Final Fantasy XIII. Now let's talk about the other parts of the game world, the dangerous parts, though I'll leave my discussion of the actual combat mechanics until a bit later in the video. I mentioned earlier that the world feels very interconnected, and this plays a significant part in why I enjoy moving through it so much. Of course, some parts of it are isolated and can effectively only be fast travelled to via airship, namely Bujerba, which contains the Lusu mines, the Ridorana Cataract, which houses the lighthouse containing the mother of all deifacted Nethicite, the Suncrest, and the game's final area, the Bahamut, and that's literally it. In fact, you can travel through the entire remaining game world on foot if you like, from the holy city of Gerovagan or the still shrine of Miriam at the far south, all the way to the Necro Hall of Nabu Dis, or Arcades itself at the far north, and I absolutely love this, as well as the fact that it's not at all a straight line from south to north. For example, if you want to travel from Rabanastre to Mount Bur Omises, you could go south through Giza Plains, then further south through Osmond Plains, before heading southeastward through Golmore Jungle before marching through the snow-covered Paramina Rift and onto the mountain. Or, you could be more unorthodox and go west from Rabanastre through the Westersand, then down into the Zertinen Caverns, past giant mantises and green slimes, and if you take a really wrong turn, the Esper Adrammelech. Then from there go on through Osmond Plains and Golmore Jungle, though this time instead of going directly to Paramina Rift, this time you could take the more dangerous, mist-laden route through the Feywood and then onto Mount Bur Omises. Now, of the two routes I outlined there, obviously the former one is the most efficient, but even so, these areas are connected. The world is connected in interesting and often unexpected ways. When you're first exploring an open combat area, even if you've picked up or bought the map for it, it won't initially tell you which areas it lies adjacent to until you actually move through that transition area. And it was always a nice feeling when I realised that one level was directly connected to some other that I traversed through hours ago. Like how you can actually get to the Dalmascan Estersand by leaving the Mosferan High Waste from the south to get to its North Bank outpost. Should I do it? Should I make the reference? Will you roll your eyes if I make the reference? No, I won't do it. Actually, fuck it. It's like in Dark Souls, where the more you explore its world, the more you realise how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, Dark Souls
is
it's a good reference, yeah.
Blighttown Field, you can actually get there simply by descending down from Firelight Shrine through a wee bit of New Londo across the Valley of the Dregs and then into its bleak, guttural gloom. There's a certain immersive satisfaction in discovering that the world you're travelling through has been laid out in a very particular way, not as a linear sequence of set pieces broken apart by the odd cutscene and boss, sorry FF13, couldn't resist, but as a believable, explorable world, bursting with flavour and crammed full of treasures, secrets and quests. I spoke about how each city and outpost differs rather significantly in their vibes and aesthetics, but you can say much the same about the larger combat areas, which I'll simply refer to as field areas from here on. That said, the degree of variance between one field area and another isn't always that substantial, not least of all because there are a lot of them, and also they can get really big. Seriously, some of these places are fucking huge, and furthermore, it's not uncommon for one expansive field area to be directly connected to another, and then another. I previously mentioned the long journey from Nalbinet to Arcades, which has you go through the Mosferan High Waste, which is a big field area, then immediately after there's the Salaka Wood, which again is pretty bloody big, and with opportunities to make detours into the Necrohall of Nabudis and the Neighbourous Deadlands if you've got a death wish. But then directly after that you go on to the Fawn Coast, which to this day I don't think I've ever fully explored because of how enormous it is, and much the same thing can be said of the Cheetah Uplands, which comes directly after. The game's not at all afraid of sending you into massive field areas that are at least twice as large as they need to be. Another example is when you journey from the Westersand to the Tomb of Wraithwall, so as to reclaim the Dawn Shard, requiring you to move through the Ogre Yensa at Sandsea, which is a silly size. But then directly after that, you have to move through the Nam Yensa Sandsea, which is about just as big. It can get pretty overwhelming, though the nature of these areas really does help to mitigate the feelings of fatigue that can crop up after you've killed your 50th Silver Lobos, your 100th Serpent, or your 200th Uratan Yensa. For a start, FF12 is a damn good looking game. Of course, I'm playing the remastered Zodiac Age version, which markedly improves the graphical fidelity, but even back on the PS2, it was impressive as hell, being released towards the end of the PS2's life cycle, as the PS3 was coming out, along with other great looking games of that generation like Resident Evil 4 and God of War 2. My praise extends far beyond sheer graphics though, because it's the game's art design and set pieces that really seal the deal. The field areas are all divided into segments, all of which are connected by transition zones which take you into the next segment, which I guess was simply a technical necessity back in 2006, as opposed to the possibility of having it all be one large open area, perhaps more akin to Grand Pulse from FF13. However, with each field area being cut up in such a manner, even different segments within the same larger field area will often have quite different aesthetics and landscape characteristics to each other. I mean, compare the northernmost parts of the Feywood to the southernmost parts. They both share the same densely misted aesthetic, but where the northern part is more labyrinthine and confusing, the southern part is more open, even featuring its own level mechanic requiring you to stand in these shrines so as to sequentially reveal the path forward. Or, Compare the Paramina Rift's
asteroid
frozen
is
brook
depleted.
with its frosted over river to the heights of the spine of the ice worm, where holy Garudas fly far above the lower sections. There's a lot of variability to really keep it interesting when moving through these areas, though I'm certainly not saying that this is always the case. I mean, most of the Ogre Yensa Sansi looks the same as all the rest of it, and you can say much the same about its Nam Yensa counterpart, but that's not to say that these particular areas are dull to move through. For a start, the whole place literally is situated on a constantly shifting sea of sand, which looks very cool. Your traditional dungeon type levels can get somewhat repetitive to look at though, and play through, like Lusu Mines, Hen Mines, Barheim Passage, and certainly Drakthor Laboratory, though at the same time, these levels also do have their own specific mechanics, like how you need to take care of the battery mimics in Barheim Passage so that there's enough power to operate the gates to progress further through the level. And for as dingy and uninspired as a lot of that level looks, even it has highlights, like this long bridge section which I think looks great. Some field areas do kind of blend in a bit though, particularly Cheetah Uplands and Sorobi Steppe, which are just really big and grassy and not especially distinctive and interesting, at least when compared to places like the Nabrius Deadlands, Giru Vegan and the Great Crystal. And speaking of the Great Crystal, both that and the Pharos at Ridorana are for sure the two most unique levels in the game, for better and for worse, to the point where I don't exactly know if I like them. I think I do, but I don't know. Let's talk about them. The Great Crystal is entered via Guru Vegan, which is a very unique level in its own right, featuring strange mechanisms, barriers and glowing paths of semi-corporeal glyphs which materialise in front of your eyes. But at Guru Vegan's end, after a tense encounter with the Tyrant boss, the team enters the Great Crystal, which is essentially a different realm of reality. Every single room here, if they could even be called rooms, is made up of glowing glyph platforms, complete with circular barriers which sometimes open to lead up or down to different rooms which could contain anything from some dangerous enemies, treasure, a barrier corresponding to one of the zodiac signs, a switch to disengage said barrier, a teleporter or even a secret boss. The only map you have here is this monstrosity, which I always thought was completely fucking useless, but it turns out that the weird names given to each room actually have meanings which can be used to decipher your position within the crystal. Pretty damn cool idea actually, though I've never engaged with it myself, usually preferring to just sprint from room to room until I eventually, through brute force, develop a somewhat satisfactory degree of orientation so as to make it my destination, all across the nation. It's a really weird level, very unique and deceptively huge, especially if you're delving into the upper levels, where some of the game's most powerful gear can be found, not to mention the Omega Mark 12 Super Boss and Ultima. And although it can be really frustrating trying to navigate your way through it, and even downright overwhelming at times if you really lose your bearings, I still enjoy moving through it. That thrill of activating a Waystone teleporter and not knowing where you'll end up next, and what bizarre monsters and unique treasures might await you there. Then there's the Pharos at Ridorana, which must be the single largest level in the game. In fact, that's literally its entire shtick, because there are 100 floors here, divided into 3 ascents, the first of which involves the collection of black orbs dropped by fallen foes so as to activate the elevator upwards, and then the defeat of specifically coloured facer type enemies so as to construct physical bridges out of phantom segments. Then there's the second ascent, which has you fight through legions of brutal enemies, either without the use of your minimap, magic, the ability to attack, or the ability to use items. The choice is yours, though it's kind of a pointless choice to give to the player because the obvious option is to just take away the minimap. Not least of all because 1, you can still just use your regular map just fine, and 2, you can still enable the semi-transparent map overlay specific to the Zodiac Age version of the game, which is even better than the minimap. The third ascent is the trickiest and in my opinion most interesting of them all, requiring the use of coloured Waystone teleporters which must be touched in the correct order, taking you higher each time towards floor 100, so if you make the wrong choice twice you'll be sent to a brutal hall filled with difficult enemies. And this can really suck, or rather it really sucked in the original PS2 version of the game, because back then there were no autosaves. The game's generally not too merciless with its save crystal placements, but there are a few places in the game where it is pretty rough, for no apparent reason, and one of those is here. I remember what must have been well over a decade ago, playing through the third ascent for about an hour and a half, collecting a ton of loot, gaining a load of levels, and gradually making good progress, but then I got chucked in this room once again I got confused by the Necro Fiend's phantasmal gaze at a bad time and died, losing all my progress and getting so mad I chucked my phone across the screen and broke its camera. Good times. The Great Crystal is also really stingy with its save crystals, ironically. Though the worst of all is the special charter dig section of Hen Mines, which leads up to Zodiac, which is the single most dangerous field area in the game, leading up to the single most difficult Esper boss fight, but it doesn't have a single save crystal. Fuck you, Final Fantasy XII, but also I love you so much. There are some completely optional field areas which you never strictly have to set foot in too if you don't want, like the Zertanid Caverns, the Necrohall of Nabudis, the Nebrius Deadlands, and even Cerobi Steppe, and then there's the Subterra portion of the Pharos at Ridorana. Remember I said that there were 100 floors there? Well, it goes down the way too, and it's way more dangerous down there. Literally right as you get out of the elevator, you get absolutely swarmed by Abaddons and Mistmares, and things only get more fucked up from there.
I like this guy a lot.
And I guess
this was
that
a great.
This
was great.
To Final Fantasy XII's combat. We've talked about its plot, its characters, and its world, but that's only about half of the picture. Because what Final Fantasy game is complete without a massive selection of weird and wonderful creatures and bosses to engage with, not to mention a varied arsenal of powerful weapons and magic with which to dispatch them. Like I said back in the intro, FF12 marked something of a shift in the franchise with the way its combat played out, because now every regular enemy you fight is right out there in the open for you to either run up and engage or give it a wide berth, be it a cute wee cacti having a snooze in the Dalmascan Ester Sand, or a mighty ashworm on the prowl within the enigmatic upper reaches of the Great Crystal. I told you how I reacted to this big change earlier, that being not well, because Final Fantasy to me was your random encounters followed by some slow, methodical turn-based combat. There were all sorts of action games I could have chosen to play for faster paced gaming experiences, but that's not what I was after from this franchise. I wanted a turn-based RPG centering around strategy, preparation and smart decision making, which turned out to pretty much be what I got when I actually played it. See, although FF12's combat looks much more action oriented, that's mainly just in its visuals, though it can't be denied that battles can get far more hectic and chaotic in this Final Fantasy when compared to the others with their designated, isolated battle arenas which only come into existence upon a battle's beginning and then cease to exist after its end, at least until the next random encounter. And that's largely because, 1. You can now freely move around whilst in combat, even while attacking and even whilst being attacked. And 2. Now when you get in a fight, there is nothing preventing other nearby monsters from joining in. And 3. Your actions as a player can and will overlap with the enemy's actions. In fact, you'll often find yourself landing an attack on an enemy right as it lands an attack on you, meaning more shit tends to be happening at any one time, compared to in previous entries where only one major action can ever occur at a time. Thus, it's more than fair to say that things feel pretty different in this entry, but not quite as different as they might seem at first glance. For one, both player and enemy actions still operate via turns. It's not like you're just hammering the X button to attack or anything, this ain't Kingdom Hearts. And furthermore, all the action stops when you bring up the command menu, giving you as much time as you need to choose another action for your party leader and everyone else before picking your desired action to be executed the next time your party member's action gauge charges up, the speed of which is governed by the weapon choice and speed stat, though there are other ways to increase a party member's speed like haste or berserk, not to mention the swiftness license. More on the license grid later though. If things are still too fast paced for you, you can even turn the battle speed down in the config menu, but personally I like to walk on the wild side and crank that shit up to 11 please. Of course, there's another major difference with FF12's combat, and that is the gambit system, though even before this gets introduced after meeting Fran and Balthier, many fights can get quite hands off, because after you command someone to attack an enemy, they will simply keep on attacking until either that enemy is defeated or they get KO'd. Once gambits get introduced, however, you can get very specific and complex with what your party members will automatically do when engaged in battle. With FF12 being well over 15 years old at this point, I'm not entirely clued up on the general sentiment around it as a whole, or its various gameplay systems, though I have in the past heard criticism regarding the gambit system. Gambits are essentially programmable AI scripts for your party. Of course, pretty much every enemy you encounter in the game has much the same feature, and I guess most other games to some degree, except enemy gambits are of course inaccessible and invisible to the player and a bit more complex compared to the gambits you can set up as a player. Probably the simplest gambit you can use is to have your party members automatically begin attacking the nearest visible enemy, saving you from having to manually target it yourself. But then, what if you have all 3 party members using this gambit when there are multiple enemies nearby? It means that everyone's going to end up attacking different enemies depending on which they're closest to, which is pretty much never desirable. This isn't a game where it makes sense to spread out the damage, and it's most definitely not one where you want to have multiple enemies around who are at critical HP levels. Thus, you can add an additional gambit command at a higher level of priority to specifically target whichever enemy the party leader is targeting. But then what if someone gets KO'd, I hear you ask? Well, why not set up an additional gambit above even the attack ones so that your party leader or whoever else will instantly use a Phoenix down whenever someone bites the dust. Or, if you've got a white mage, have them cast Raise or Arise, which is a bit slower but which will restore more HP in the process. You can even set up gambits to be used strictly outside of battle by placing them below all attack gambits. I like having it so that my party is always covered by Protect Guard and buffs like Bravery and Haste. It makes it so that if I'm running around a field area and the buff runs out, well, because I've set up a gambit for it, someone will automatically recast it so that I'm always nice and buffed up for any upcoming encounters. Now, those were just some basic ones I went over there, but if you're really into this stuff and are the kind of player who gets a kick out of optimizing your party setup, you can get really involved with gambits. You don't start out with them all from the beginning, but you can purchase them at the gambit shops located in every city, and for cheap too. In fact, I've always thought that the game could have simply done away with the gambit stores entirely and just given you them all from the start, though I guess they didn't want new players to be too overwhelmed when they opened the menu and saw pages of very specific conditions and commands. Like I said, you can get really specific with it, like having specific party members use particular abilities on enemies with specific weaknesses, status effects, or even relative levels of defense or speed. And the same is true on the defensive side of things. One of the most dangerous status effects in the game is Confuse, because it can very quickly result in things spiraling into chaos, especially in the late game when you're taking on groups of super dangerous enemies, coupled with the fact that by that point in the game, one hit from a party member can easily KO another, and so it's a very good idea to have the gambit ally status Confuse with the action Nu Kai Sand, and you'll probably want to set it to the highest priority too. Mind you, for the vast majority of the game, it's really not all that necessary to get too technical with gambits. I personally like to keep things pretty simple and then only have a play around with them if I'm really struggling on a boss, though for this latest playthrough that literally didn't occur until I took on the Behemoth King, who I'd say is in the top 5 most challenging encounters in the game. For that enemy, I felt that a good gambit setup was just about crucial for success, whereas for nearly everything else, a good gambit system felt more like a convenience, which goes back to the main criticism I've heard regarding FF12's core combat, that being that it's kind of there for the player to do less. I mean, I just spoke about setting up your shit so that negative status ailments automatically get healed with the corresponding item, and enemies with specific elemental weaknesses get automatically targeted with that corresponding elemental spell, etc, etc. But it kind of raises the question of, hey, why can't you just do all that yourself, you lazy bastard? Which I do get. I mean, objectively, the optimal gambit setup would be one where you never even need to select any specific action yourself. Instead, just approaching an enemy and letting the rest play out and then moving on to the next enemy, in a situation where the game is partially playing itself, which might sound kind of shit and pointless, except it's not. See, I think the reason it works, at least for me, is because of the very nature of FF12's more free and open combat and these wide open spaces which are filled with a lot of enemies. Now, let me preface this next point by stating that I haven't done this, but if I was to count the number of enemies I'd killed after 40 hours of playing FF12 versus 40 hours of your more traditional random encounter based games like FF7 or FF10 or even the retro Final Fantasies, then I think FF12 would probably have any other Final Fantasy game beat even if you multiplied its kill count by 2. For as much as I love this game's combat, I will admit that individual battles don't feel quite as meaningful or impactful in this game compared to the others, not least of all because of the lack of those traditional audio-visual elements to initiate and end the fight. There's not much fanfare from one battle to another, but rather you're moving through big open spaces and taking care of business, from one pack of enemies to the next, and there are a lot of enemies. I think this is one of the reasons why the gambit system specifically works in this game, whereas it would not work at all in something like FF10. There are a lot of Panthers and Marlboros in Golmore Jungle, but I just don't need to be making every decision for every battle. I know my team are strong enough, I know my gear is up to scratch, and I know my gambits are set up so that if I get hit by a blaster or a bad breath, someone's going to throw out a remedy or an Izuna to fix it right up. And if things get really out of hand, I can instantly take control and start throwing out commands to get the situation back on track. I definitely don't want to make it seem like this is a game that practically plays itself though, because it really isn't. For as much as the capacity is there to set things up in a certain way so that problems get resolved the instant they appear, it often doesn't work out so neatly. Like I said earlier, battles can get chaotic as hell and it's very easy to get overwhelmed, especially if you step out into a level that you're not supposed to be in, like if you take a trip down into the Zertinin Caverns too early and get absolutely annihilated by a level 86 Archaeo Avis, or venture a bit too deep into Golmore Jungle to the point where you start seeing hellhounds and dinosaurs, or you find yourself in the Necrohall of Nabudis after straying too far from the relative safety of the Salaka Wood before getting savaged by a pack of Baknames. That's not to say that the only times you'll find yourself in any danger is when you're under leveled though, because the game does frequently make sure to keep you on your toes even in regular areas with regular monsters, and especially when it comes to the bosses and hunts, and extra especially when multiple negative status ailments start getting thrown at you. Thus, throughout my playthroughs I found gambits to be a great tool for expediting the process of moving through field areas, being a great help in battle until you come up against something you're not prepared for, in which case it's time to turn off cruise control to start micromanaging the situation and taking matters into your own hands. One of the tricks that you might really feel the need to pull off when shit does hit the fan and your party members are getting KO'd just about as fast as you can revive them are quickenings. Quickenings are essentially FF12's version of limit breaks or overdrives, being very extravagant and capable of dealing massive damage, all whilst the enemy is frozen in place. The first time I tried one out in battle, I had absolutely no fucking idea what was happening, because I didn't bother to read the in-game traveller's tips on the subject, and my adolescent brain was too overwhelmed by the flashing colours on screen to discern what my next course of action should be. But upon initiating a quickening, you have the chance to chain an additional one by pressing the corresponding correct face button next to another quickening attack down in the bottom right, either from the same character or from another, providing they're not KO'd, confused, berserked, etc. If none of the attacks shown are highlighted in white, then you can shuffle the options and hope one does appear, or if your missed charges are depleted, the resource that lets you use these special attacks in the first place, then you want the missed charge option to show up, which does exactly what it sounds like, priming that character for additional quickenings. Every party member has 3 different quickenings to unlock, which, as you'd expect, get more powerful, from Van's Red Spiral to his Pyroclasm, from Fran's Feral Strike to her Shatterheart, and from Balthier's Fires of War to his Element of Treachery. Frankly, my dear, these attacks look sick as fuck, and it's a real thrill to chain together as many as possible before that 4-second timer runs out. In the early stretches of the game, you probably won't be getting any crazy high chains, especially if you've only got 1 or 2 level 1 quickenings unlocked, but even so, it can make for some incredibly satisfying moments. I'm sure everyone remembers that first time you venture out into the Dalmascan Ester Sand, which is almost exclusively populated by wolves and cactites in its first segment. Well, except for the goddamn T-Rex prowling around, that is. You know, the one that can literally devour nearby enemies to make itself stronger. I know I've been enthusiastically singing the game's praises for this entire video thus far, but I'm going to continue to do that here, because I love shit like this. Placing an especially intimidating enemy very early on when you're still really weak, letting you see what the game has in store for you, and giving you a harsh lesson in humility if you decide to piss it off. Because I don't care how optimised your gambits are at this point in the game, you ain't killing this thing yet. In fact, you literally can't access gambits at all the first time you come out here because they aren't unlocked yet. You've got no chance. Heck, even if you come back here another 4 to 6 hours later, you'll likely still get flattened by it, if you try and fight it conventionally that is. But unleash a long flashy chain of quickenings, building up the damage with each attack whilst being totally immune to any damage yourself, and then dealing in excess of 100 times the damage that you could pull off with a regular attack. Well, cathartic moments like that are the reason I get up in the morning, the one and only reason. Of course, the cherry on the moist cupcake with quickenings is that depending on how many of them you chain together, and based on how many of them are level 1s, 2s or 3s, you will get an additional AoE after effect known as a concurrence. There are 8 of these based on the game's elements. You've got Inferno, Cataclysm, Torrent, Windburst, Whiteout, Arc Blast, the particularly dazzling Luminescence, and the most powerful of them all, Black Hole. Though even though they do all correspond to specific elements, they do non-elemental damage, meaning you'll never inadvertently find yourself healing an enemy instead of hurting it. Even though you won't be pulling them out all the damn time, I think the quickenings are really important for elevating the overall flashiness of the game's combat, because I have always found it to be somewhat lacking in that department, at least when compared to my other favourite Final Fantasy games. Yes, the environments look incredible, and yes, there are absolutely some amazing looking enemies and bosses, but with the new capacity for free movement during fights, both for you and the enemy, there's not as much room for the kinds of outrageous enemy attack animations which were so common in the previous games. You're going to be seeing a lot of rakes, screwtails and the occasional bad breath, and even the occasional white breath, but not quite so much of the more cinematic shit. A lot of bosses do have special attacks, but they tend to look quite generic, looking very similar to concurrences, with the Firemain's Bushfire, the Elder Worm's Sporefall, or literally any special attack by an Esper boss. Mind you, the Espers do tend to provide some of the sickest visuals in the game, specifically when you are using them, and I'm specifically talking about their special moves. Of course, summons have been around in one form or another since Final Fantasy III, introducing staples of the series like Ramu, Shiva, Ifrit and Titan, though from then up until Final Fantasy IX, they served as super flashy special attacks with long grand animations, dealing massive damage to all enemies, or even providing other benefits like how Carbuncle casted Reflect on your whole party in FF5, or how Phoenix also revived everyone in your party in FF7. Then FF10 came around and allowed you to actually take control of the creatures you summoned, each of which had a regular attack, a special attack, a selection of magic relevant to their specific element, and an overdrive. As for FF12, well, it has Espers, a selection of 13 weird and wonderful mystical beings to be summoned in battle alongside the specific party member who brought them forth. Of course, you've got to find them first and then fight them. Of the 13, only 5 are actually mandatory, being encountered naturally through the story. First Belius in the Tomb of Wraithwall, then Matthias in the Still Shrine of Miriam, then Shem Hazai in Geruvagan, followed by Hashmal and the Pharaohs at Rebirana, followed directly by Famfrit, who gets summoned halfway through the awesome second fight with Dr. Sid. The others are more elusive though, either being situated in optional field areas like Adramelech lurking in the centre of the Zertanen Caverns, or like Ultima, who is secluded far beyond some of the most dangerous parts of the Great Crystal, while others are tied to side quests of varying length and complexity. At the simpler end you have Zerimus, who can simply be accessed by talking to an acolyte in Mount Bar Omises after defeating Judge Bergen, who will give you the Stone of the Condemner, allowing access to where Zerimus waits within a hidden section of the Still Shrine of Miriam. Then, at the other side of the spectrum of complexity, you have Chaos, who has multiple interweaving side quests required to be completed before being able to access him, putting you through sequence puzzles, having you do detective work around Rabanastre, following up various leads, making you watch a low-key tearjerker of a cutscene where these 3 old Numo dudes sacrifice themselves, and then having you fight 2 formidable bosses in the Necro Hall of Nabudis before eventually allowing you to face off against Chaos himself. As far as the actual battles go against these creatures, they play out exactly the same as regular bosses, having lots of HP and some fancy attacks, and sometimes even having extra minions who join in the fight, annoyingly. Every Esper boss has a special attack corresponding to their element, like Lizaja, Aquaja, Darkja, but I found it to be a bit of a shame that this is the case, because Although they look kind of flashy, they're also pretty generic. And also, when you're controlling them, the Esper special attack animations are without a doubt some of the coolest in the game. But you could easily go a whole playthrough without seeing a single one.
Everyone else runs faster than me. I've never understood it. I started out in front of these people. Now I'm behind them. Makes no sense. Everyone has always ran faster than me. It drives me so crazy.
The asteroid is depleted.
To be honest, on my most recent playthrough, I probably would have gone the whole way myself without seeing any of these if I wasn't making this retrospective, because to be perfectly honest, I have never felt the particular need to actually use an Esper, other than for shits and giggles. A big reason for that is just how vulnerable you are in this game. See, no other Final Fantasy game I've played makes death seem like more of an inevitable and sometimes constant occurrence than Final Fantasy XII. I don't mean death as in a game over, where all party members get KO'd, both your primary and backup team, but I mean individual party members getting KO'd and having to be revived. A lot of enemies hit really freaking hard. They can sometimes chain together attack after attack until you are dead, and a significant feature of this game's combat, and one I'm not hugely fond of, is that some enemies become much more powerful when their health gets very low, as in they'll start doing significantly more damage, taking significantly less damage, and become much harder to hit. In fact, this is when your quickening chains really come into play, because sometimes towards the end, an enemy can simply feel too powerful to fight conventionally, even though they were perfectly manageable for the first 90% of the fight, necessitating a big finisher during which you cannot be attacked yourself. Thus, whenever I found myself in a challenging boss fight, the time simply never felt right to summon an Esper, because one nasty attack,
Come on, me.
a string of attacks on the party member who summoned them, and away that Esper goes. Mind you, the Zodiac versions of the game introduced a pretty sick feature, where not only can you now choose which actions the Espers perform, but you can directly control them. You cannot do either of these things in the original. The same is true of guest characters in your party who you couldn't command at all before, or modify their gambits, or even have them level up. I actually had no idea you could control Espers in this version. In fact, this footage on screen now is where I discovered it by accident after I got pissed off with Exodus moving so fucking slowly through the level, and on a whim, randomly tried to select it as the party leader, only for it to actually work. And you can even send out a finisher move now whenever you want, whereas it was all AI controlled in the original. In fact, sometimes if you got unlucky, your Esper would leave the battlefield without you even getting to see these incredible animations, which is a sin. In short, I love that Espers are in the game, coming in some very weird designs, having dazzling finisher animations, and having some excellent quests tied to them, making the game world feel that bit more alive and mysterious, especially if you weren't expecting to run into them that day. But ultimately and mechanically, I do feel that they are somewhat superfluous in that you just don't need to use them. But look, there's more to this whole story than simply wiping out dozens of monsters in every level, because the pure mechanics of it are complemented by other elements which make it feel all so rewarding and fun. In fact, I'm not exaggerating when I say that Final Fantasy XII is one of the most satisfying and rewarding games I've ever played, and a massive part of that literally is the rewards. So let's talk about those. Before this game came along, your primary source of earning gil in Final Fantasy games was by winning battles. Maybe you knew a good farming spot where the enemies yielded the big bucks, or maybe you had a passive ability on a piece of equipment to multiply your earnings, but be it a hell house or a mimic, enemies dropped gil. Well, in FF12, with very few exceptions, enemies do not drop gil. Instead, they drop loot. Now, back when I was first introduced to this system, I didn't really get it, and I didn't particularly like it. I mean, loot's main purpose is to be sold for gil, so why have this extra, seemingly unnecessary step in the middle? Well, there are a few reasons, but after what must be over 350 hours of playtime in this game over multiple playthroughs spanning back over 15 years, the main reason is it's fun. Nearly every enemy in the game can drop loot upon being defeated. You won't always get a drop, but around half the time you will, leaving a glowing bag on the ground to be picked up, making a satisfying wee jingly noise upon being collected. Monsters have multiple different pieces of loot they can drop though, of varying rarities. Take the Cerberus, found in the Feywood for example. It has a 40% chance to drop a prime pelt, a 25% chance to drop a fire crystal, a 5% chance to drop a Francisca, which is actually a weapon, and a 1% chance to drop a Libra gem, though if you have yourself the Hunter's Monograph, there's an additional 5% chance to get a Hellgate's Flame. Anyone who has ever went through the ordeal of trying to unlock the Tournesol will have keen memories of farming these burning bastards for Hellgate's Flames, I'm sure. Thing is though, these drop rates are not fixed, because there's an additional mechanic here called chain bonus, where the more enemies from a particular category you defeat in a row, the higher the drop rate percentages get for rarer loot, and you can even get multiples of the same type of loot from the one drop. It doesn't have to be the exact same enemy for the chain bonus to continue. Like here, I could take down both Cerberuses and Tartaruses, and the chain will continue because they're both wolf type enemies. But if I went and nailed a deadly Nightshade or Golem in the same area, then the chain is broken. It is very satisfying to build up a massive chain bonus, because you can get rewarded with silly amounts of loot, which means silly amounts of gil when you sell it all off at a vendor upon getting back to town. Furthermore, as your chain grows, the loot icons themselves also get larger and larger, making even louder and jingly sounds, and even giving you little boosts to your MP. It's pure dopamine hit after pure dopamine, and I love it. It's a little bit shakily implemented though. As I said, it feels great to get a really big chain bonus going, but in reality, this doesn't happen very often at all, because areas are almost never filled with the same enemy type. There's usually several completely different ones, and so you sometimes need to deliberately try and run by certain enemies, missing out on the loot that they would give you, hoping they don't attack you in the process as you're sneaking by. You almost always really need to force it, other than in places like the Sand Sea, where you'll often be running into many all-rounds or Uritan Yenses in a row. The absolute best way to get ridiculous bonuses going, however, is in areas where you have either zombies or skeletons spawning from the ground, like in this part of the Still Shrine of Miriam, the place in the neighbourous Deadlands where you fight the Roblon, or my personal favourite, the Zeramis boss arena after he's been beaten. As discussed, the field areas can get really big, and the dungeons especially labyrinthine, and as such, you can be out for hours before you naturally find yourself back at a city or outpost, meaning that by the end of any long expedition, you'll find yourself with a bag near bursting with loot, and the more dangerous the dungeon, the more valuable your bag of loot. In my near 25 years of gaming experience, I have encountered few things more satisfying than returning back to a vendor after an hour or two or three of fighting monsters with a bag full of loot to sell it all off. Sure,
I know, me too. I love that shit.
You might have made a lot of gil after a big dungeon, but in FF12, the gratification
12 is so good
delayed,
like that.
making it feel that much more intense when it comes around. You'll nearly always have your more basic constants like stones, magicite or crystals corresponding to particular elements which don't sell for all that much, but it's the stranger and more exotic stuff that fetches the big bucks, especially if you've got a lot of them. Prime pelts, Marlboro flowers, mithril, behemoth steaks, demon eyeballs.
Behemoth
dark
steaks,
and
demon
bronze,
eyeballs. I
beast
love that
lord
shit. Yeah.
horns. Look, I'm not
So
gonna sit
good.
here
15
and
was
list
good
every
like
piece
this
of loot
too.
in the game,
Yeah.
'cause there are
12
too
and
bloody
15 were
many.
both good, yeah.
But even though there's no visual representation of them, just the names and descriptions of them can be enough to give me a thrill when I pick it up, especially when I think of how much they might be worth, and especially if it's something I've never gotten before. For example, even on my latest playthrough, I didn't know there was a piece of loot called Eye of the Hawk. It's just never dropped from me before, but hey, this random vulture yielded one, and now I can sell it, and hey, it happens to contribute towards a particular bizarre recipe which I'm a wee bit closer to unlocking, bringing us nicely on to the Bazaar, another great aspect of the game's loot system. Although it's all invisible and in the background, when you sell loot, it gets added to a counter which tracks the loot requirements for special items accessible only via the Bazaar menu. For example, here I met the requirements for unlocking the Light Spear Bazaar item, which is the javelin weapon, unlocked after selling 2 horns, 2 foul flesh, and 3 windstones. Or here, I've unlocked the memory of your Bazaar item after offloading 5 quality stones, getting me 99 pebbles. Yes! Except
What?
not really, because they don't actually do anything, but these are the exception, because there's around 100 different recipes for all sorts of different stuff, from bundles of items, to armour, to some of the rarest and most powerful weapons in the game. Most of the Bazaar items you unlock will simply do so as a result of you just going about your business, nailing monsters and collecting loot. But if you want the good shit, be prepared to farm, and farm a lot. Now, for this playthrough I didn't do much farming because I don't have all the time in the world when preparing for a video, and so certain indulgences must sadly be skipped. But I did go for the Silver Bow Bazaar item, which unlocks one of the best bows in the game, requiring 3 Beast Lord horns, 3 moon rings and 4 Sagittarius gems, and costing a pretty penny at 100,000 gil. The moon rings I'd already managed to get naturally after taking down enough ashworms in the Great Crystal, but Beast Lord horns I had to farm from Humbabas and the Mosferin High Waste, having an 8% drop rate with the Knight's Monograph, and taking me around 20 minutes to farm all 3. And as for the Sagittarius gem, that must have taken me a bit over half an hour for me to steal all 4 from the Fubar Flan enemies in the neighbourous Deadlands. But all this is nothing compared to some other Bazaar requirements, with the most egregious example being, of course, the Tournesol, the most powerful greatsword in the game. Now, while I did not go for the Tournesol on this playthrough, I have went for it on previous playthroughs. Twice, in fact, and it takes a damn while. I mean, it does only require 9 items to be fair, 3 nuggets of gem steel, 3 Imperial Souls, and 3 Serpentariuses. Cool, so which enemy drops a gem steel? Well, other than a level 99 red chocobo which has a fewer than 1 in 250% chance of spawning in Osmond Plains, none of them do. Instead, the gem steel itself is a Bazaar item, itself requiring very rare ingredients and a lot of farming. Same with the Imperial Soul and the Serpentarius, each of which you require 3 of.
Oh, I died. Why did I have 3 leeches in it? Oh, because his link. He linked me. That son of a bitch. That place is too ugly. I'm gonna go to Battalion now.
You'll have no idea unless you've been fracking it yourself. Also, I guess whether or not this all sounds like fun in the first place entirely depends on your attitude towards farming and grinding and such. But my own feelings are that
I love
if
it.
the game's mechanics are fun, then I don't mind farming.
Yeah, it's really fun.
I have great memories from when I was younger, spending hours stealing Damascus steels from the Blue Sun and SoD Steppe, and killing basilisks by the 100 in the Feywood for Serpent Eyes. If FF12 did not have loot, and instead simply had enemies dropping gil like normal, I really don't think it would be anywhere near as fun, because those repeated bursts of anticipation any time an enemy drops something after death really are effective at keeping me engaged even 100 hours into a playthrough. I've discussed the gambit system and how to some extent battles can be made to play out semi-automatically, and that I'm okay with that, but the only reason
I have
is
wow,
how
a lot of
effectively
armaments.
and interestingly the game rewards you, not only with loot, but also how your characters develop over time, combining both new and old systems in a fusion I very much enjoy. The Final Fantasy franchise is of course no stranger to including interesting and creative systems to make the process of going from a piss-weak low-level chump to a blazing high-level powerhouse that extra bit engaging. The older games had variations of the job system. FF7
Skill
had the
training
superb
completed.
materia system. FF8 had all that shit with the Guardian forces and stuff. I don't know, it's been a while since I've played it. FF9 allowed characters to learn abilities via AP points earned from equipment, and for my personal favourite of all, FF10 had the sphere grid, which I absolutely loved. It's such a shame we will never see anything like it again in this franchise. FF13 featured a sort of pale imitation of it, but was significantly more linear and streamlined. As for FF12 though, well, it introduced the license board, another system that I really like, not as much as the sphere grid, but still, it's great. When you defeat an enemy, your party are rewarded with LP, or license points, or 2 points for larger enemies, or more still for rare game, or even more than that for vanquishing marks or beating bosses. Unlike how EXP is shared out, it doesn't matter who lands the final blow. Everyone gets a point, even your backup team. Another difference between EXP and LP is how they scale. Enemies at the start of the game will generally only award you with very low amounts of EXP, but this will gradually increase as you start taking on fiercer monsters to the point where by the end you'll be netting thousands of EXP per kill. With LP though, most enemies in the game give you just one. Here's me killing a level 7 cockatrice in the Dalmascan Ester Sand for 6 EXP, shared out between my 3 party members for 2 EXP each, and 1 LP for everyone too. But now here's me killing some level 60 mom bombs in the Great Crystal for well over 4,500 EXP, again shared between my crew for a bit over 1,500 EXP apiece, but still just the 1 LP each. Thus, accruing points on your license is all about the quantity of enemies killed over quality. It makes it so that even when you're over leveled for an area you might find yourself having to move through, it's still worthwhile taking down the low level enemies along the way for the LP, not to mention the loot. But also, the fact that you still get just 1 LP most of the time for even higher level enemies doesn't make them feel any less rewarding because 1. You're still getting loads more EXP than you would for easier enemies. 2. You're still getting more valuable loot, and 3. LP becomes relatively less valuable from the midpoint of the game onwards anyway, after you've gotten most of the licenses you really want, and are just left with the ones for accessories and equipment that you probably won't even use. I guess I should now talk about how the license board actually works now that I've covered how the points work, though to be honest it's pretty damn simple, or at least it was before they refined it all for the Zodiac versions of the game, forcing you to think about your choices more carefully. Licenses essentially act as permissions, for want of a better term, to use owned abilities or even equipment. You may have purchased Curaga or Darkra at the magic shop, but unless a given party member has the license for that spell, they cannot use it, regardless of how high their MP or magic power stats are, and the same is true for equipment. You might have found a sick new weapon in a treasure pot somewhere, but you got to purchase the license first with LP, and conversely, buying the license for something doesn't mean shit unless you actually own that thing. There are many other license types too though, some which act as basic but permanent stat increases, while others bestow buffs which will from then on automatically activate once a condition has been met. For example, you have Battle Lore, which improves a character's physical attack damage by increasing their strength stat, but then you have a license like Focus, which buffs damage by an additional 50% when that character is at full health, or Inquisitor, which automatically restores some MP after that person deals damage. Thus, some licenses are rather dull and unexciting but still important, while others have a much bigger impact. For example, the channeling licenses are extremely important for mages, decreasing the MP cost of every spell by 10%. And then you have the swiftness licenses, which are extremely important for literally everyone, increasing the speed of their charge time by 10%. And bear in mind that multiple copies of licenses like this can exist on the license board, making for some pretty substantial differences in party member effectiveness from the start of the game compared to at the end. In the original version of the game, there was simply one large board containing every single license, with each party member having their own isolated board. And by that I mean while every version was identical, one party member buying a license had no effect on whether any other character could also buy it, apart from with Espers. Those are character specific. I guess it's similar to FF10's sphere grid in that sense, though there was a bit more capacity to manipulate the sphere grid for others too in that game, through the use of things like strength spheres and HP spheres, etc. Every party member started on a different part of the board, encouraging them down the path of using specific weapons and armour, but you could essentially choose to develop them near identically if you really wanted, which was an aspect of the original which drew very well deserved criticism. It was entirely possible to have every party member capable of wielding any weapon and wearing any armour, and capable of casting any magic and using any technique, with the only real difference between them being their quickenings, which, other than their animations, don't really do anything to meaningfully differentiate one character from the next. In fact, not only was it possible to develop your characters in this way, or at least have them end up that way by the end game, but it was simply the optimal way to go about things. Why have just one or two party members specialise in black magic when you can have everyone do it? Why have every character using different weapon types when you can just arm them all with the strongest currently available weapon at that point in the game? What's that? Someone's been KO'd? Hey, no problem, I'll just have literally any one of my 6 party members cast a rise to restore them to full health. I always enjoyed the license board in its original form, but it was certainly in need of some refinement.
Zodiac got really good.
The Zodiac versions did indeed introduce that refinement, combining the board with a job system. Instead of having one
super
massive board,
fucking good.
you must now choose a job for each party member, providing them with a much smaller but more specialised board to develop on. And just a bit into the game, you get the option of choosing a secondary job for everyone, expanding each party member's versatility. Furthermore, if you're not happy with your choice for someone, you can actually get all your LP back and just pick a job or two, which is nice. Now you don't get to have a party where everyone's capable of using Kuraja and available to be equipped with literally any weapon you find, be it a greatsword, gun or katana. Now instead of having 6 healers, you have maybe 2, and instead of anyone being able to cast Protectga, Shellga, Haste or Faith, maybe now you've only got one guy for that. It heavily encourages you to lean in to specific roles for your different party members, rather than having everyone being a jack of all trades, and it gives you a good reason to try out different weapon types. Although it might not be at all obvious at first, there's far more to the game's weapons than their mere attack power stat, which shows up when you're browsing armaments at a shop. Well, I guess it is obvious if you read the in-game Traveller's Tips page on the subject, but again, I never did as a teenager. In fact, believe it or not, I literally only just bothered to read it at the time of writing. It turned out to be very enlightening. I wish I had read it before though, because I spent ages ignoring some weapon types while favouring others, purely based on their attack power stat. This meant that I never even considered using guns for my entire first playthrough, because going by their attack power stat, they're one of the weakest weapon types in the game. But what that stat does not tell you is that guns also ignore the target's defense, which comes in extremely handy if you're, I don't know, dealing with an enemy with really high defense. Also, there's a bunch of cool ammunition types to find, modifying the gun's element, damage output, and even giving it a chance to inflict certain status effects. The same is also true of the game's other 3 ranged weapon types, those being crossbows, bows and bombs. Even amongst the ranged categories though, there are still big differences. For example, guns might ignore enemy defense, but they're also the slowest overall weapon category in the game, whereas bows are one of the fastest types, dealing damage based on the party member's strength and speed stats. Then you have axes and hammers, which are significantly more RNG based, similarly to hand bombs, another ranged weapon type. I was particularly drawn to axes and hammers on early playthroughs because their attack power stats were way higher than all the others, even very early into the game, but then you actually try using one and deal thousands of damage. Guys, I've just found my new favourite weapon. Let's go on for another hit, and actually never mind, now it's doing 12 damage. The damage output of these weapons is very unreliable and highly luck based, which can be fun, but then it could also really fuck you over, especially if you've got a boss on death's door and you just need 1 or 2 more good hits, only for your weapon to completely shit the bed. It's great fun trying out the different weapons and seeing if they're for you or not, because it's not like each job can only use one possible weapon. There are still options within each class. That's not to say that every weapon type has equally high potential though. I've always found poles, maces and crossbows to be kind of underwhelming, and even with guns I usually stop using them towards the end of the game, though it's quite possible that I'm just not using them right. And also I don't have much experience with the newer weapons added in exclusively for the Zodiac edition, like the Kanya, Bonebreaker or Tula. Gear really is huge in FF12. I mean, sure, leveling up matters for improving your base stats and unlocking new buffs on the license grid, is key for giving you that extra edge, but if you're not keeping your party members up to date with the best gear available to you at that time, you will struggle. This also isn't the type of game where it's worth hanging on to your older weapons for long at all though. In the vast majority of cases, anytime you replace a party member's older weapon with a newer one, you can just sell the older one. If its stats are inferior, then it's simply inferior. Though in saying that, there was one playthrough I did back on the PS2 version where I chose to collect every single weapon in the game, just for the hell of it. Well, apart from the Zodiac Spear, which to this day I've never actually had. And no wonder when the steps required to actually get it were so bizarrely specific and easy to mess up, though apparently it's somewhat easier to get a hold of in the Zodiac version. Another thing I once did, on what I believe was my very first playthrough of the game, was to just never buy armour. I just didn't see the point. Boring, I said. Give me badass weapons and such. Piss off with your Chanters de Jaleba. Well, turns out you really do need armour. I couldn't understand why I was struggling so much, but it was just because I wasn't buying new armours. Though on the Zodiac Age version, I very rarely felt the need to buy any armour at all, because of all the good gear I kept either finding in treasure pots or getting as drops. I know that lots of stuff got tweaked heavily in that area, with things being far more forgiving and reasonable now. The one change that I wasn't crazy about was how many abilities are now found. Before, they would simply become available for purchase at places like Balfenheim Port once you reached certain milestones in the game, even some very powerful spells like Dispelga or Scourge, etc. I'm not saying that this was necessarily the most interesting way to have players get new abilities, but even so, if you'd bought the licenses for them and had gotten that far into the game and have the guild to pay for them, why not? Well, in the Zodiac versions, lots of the best abilities are now located in treasure pots, and only treasure pots, sometimes out in the middle of bloody nowhere. Take Float, for example. A very common hazard throughout the game's field areas are traps, spinning pink proximity mines of sorts, which trigger when you get too close to them, messing up your team in different ways depending on which type of trap you triggered. You can't actually see them at all unless you use a technique called Libra, which reveals the location of all traps in the area as well as giving you more detailed information on things like enemy HP and elemental weaknesses and such. Even so, Libra or not, good fucking work avoiding a lot of these, even if you do know exactly where they are, especially when your other two party members and maybe even a guest character are trailing behind you. That said, there is a trick to allow you to just float over the traps, and that trick's name is Float. In the original, it simply became available for purchase after you defeated Judge Bergen, which isn't too early in the game, but nor is it super late. But then, nor is it missable, it's right there in the magic shop. Well, in the Zodiac versions, guess where you find the float spell? Right here, in this specific, easily missable chest in this random segment of the Cheetah Uplands. In fact, I did miss it for almost my entire most recent playthrough, and I only eventually found it after I gave in and just looked it up, because I needed it. I was getting blasted to smithereens by explosion, Sten Needle and Fusillade traps galore. It's not just important stuff like float that are placed like this though. The same thing is true of telekinesis, which is massively important for dealing with flying enemies, and I randomly came across powerful magics like Bravery, Faith, Shelga and Protecta in much the same way, and it felt weird. Like, every time it happened, I did a double take, saying to myself, did I just find Bravery in a fucking pot? It always made for a nice surprise, don't get me wrong, but like I said, it also felt kind of weird and borderline arbitrary, and that's also because of the way treasure is treated in this game. It's not like in the previous games where every chest is laid out in a specific place and contains a specific ability item or piece of equipment. No, in FF12 the treasure pots kind of operate in a similar way to the percentage based drops from enemies and such. For a start, tons of pots only have a certain percentage chance to appear at all, and then they might have a range of possible rewards upon opening them. Didn't get what you want? Well, how about this? Simply move away 2 screens to a different segment of the level and then come back and try again, because in most cases treasure pots literally respawn. Thus, it's not just enemies you'll find yourself farming if you want some of the strongest stuff, but also treasure pots. I spent about 40 minutes trying to get a ribbon accessory from a specific treasure pot which has a chance to spawn in the Subterra region of Pharaohs before I just gave up. But when you do get what you want, as ever, it is quite a thrill. While we're on the subject of thrills and rewards, I guess I should now talk about one of my favourite aspects of this game, and that is the hunts. Very early on, before you even set foot in the Dalmascan Estersand, in fact, you are introduced to the world of mark hunting by Tomaj in the Sandsea pub in Rabanastre, who spins a tale of woe about some fearsome fiend terrorising poor couriers out in the desert, prompting Van to accept a bill posted on one of the game's many hunt boards, agreeing to vanquish the rogue Tomato, a vexing representative of the deadly Nightshade family, which can be found hanging out atop a rocky cliff not too far from the entrance to the city. It's not a difficult fight at all, but it does provide a respectable increase in challenge and engagement compared to the lowly wolves and simple cactides making up the rest of the desert. And there's even a cute wee cinematic at the halfway point, letting you know that you can expect some perhaps unexpected extra flavour in these side quests going forward. The first stage of any hunt is to agree to talk to the petitioner after a new bill appears on the hunt board, after which that petitioner must be sought out, who will then give you details on the unique enemy, known as a mark, after which you can venture out to the location provided and hunt it down, before returning back to the petitioner for your well-deserved reward. It's the exact same structure used by The Witcher 3 for its contracts. Every single hunt follows this structure, and in a lesser game it might all get a bit stale, but this is not a lesser game, and indeed the hunts make for some of the best content in the game, and that's because of both the quality of the writing and stories and because of the marks themselves. At the beginning, the stories are generally pretty simple. Stuff like the Thexterra, which, like the rogue Tomato, has been haranguing couriers and caravans in the desert, specifically the Westersand, and so you go out that way, only having to venture a short ways off from the entrance to the city to take care of it. I mean, I say it's simple, but it's still a really cool hunt. The design of the Thexterra is very sick, and indeed, pretty much every mark has a unique design, be it a palette swap, and or size difference and or other differences to their shape and character. But after not too long at all, the hunts start turning into proper side quests with great stories, sometimes fun, though other times surprisingly deep, like Pilika here in Bujerba had a cute wee pet named Carbo, but one day the pet went missing. A bit of time passed and Pilika started hearing rumours about a mass of rock toys rampaging in the Luzu mines, and so petitions us to take it down before it causes someone harm. So you go down there, and yep, because of how rich the magicite is in the mines, it grew and is now a real danger. So you take it down and return to Pilika, only for Carbo to appear again, except all small now. He's a little cutie. Look, maybe I'm just easily impressed, but this is great. It's just one of 45 unique hunts in the game, but it is dripping with personality, with a simple but enjoyable mini story with a cool enemy to fight. But then you have a hunt like the Crocodile, with the petitioner being located in the centre of Giza Plains, specifically during the rain season, where the nomads there have left. He's here alone, but wants you to slay the Crocodile and retrieve a ring. But here, instead of the game telling you exactly where to find the beast, it only gives you clues, telling you the mark is to be found near a bridge. This will happen more with the later, harder hunts, with some telling you exactly where to find the mark, some being far more vague on where it can be found or the conditions to make it appear, while some hunts give you little to no information on where to go at all. These various steps you need to go through can be a bit annoying, especially when you just want to find the fucking thing and beat it, but by and large, they do make hunts more engaging, making you actually have to use your brain as to how to lure it out. Back to the Crocodile though, upon beating it you get the Ring of the Toad, which upon taking back to the ghostly petitioner gets you a fat reward, though he also asks you to return the ring to his beloved. If you return to this same zone during the dry season, you can give this ring to the village elder and hear the story of how when she was younger her husband gave her this ring. But when out roaming the plains one day she lost it, and upon seeing how sad it made her, this prompted her husband to venture out and search for it, even though he knew the much more dangerous rain season was very soon to come, and indeed he never did return, except briefly many years later, to petition some heroic hunter to slay the fearsome beast that killed him decades ago after swallowing his lady's ring, now returned. As you progress through the story, more hunts become available to you, with each having a rank between 1 and 8 based on their level of difficulty, and some of these really are difficult, especially if you get a bit too eager and try taking them on too early. Hunts are an excellent way to break up the main story, to earn some extra gil and get some great gear, and also encourage you to return back to previously explored areas that you might have otherwise ignored for the rest of the game. But rather than me just seeing them as a diversion, I really do consider them to be highlights in their own right. Not all of them, of course. I mean, some are quite forgettable, like the Feral Retriever or the Darksteel, but there are a lot of really good ones, and even those with the associated stories aren't super memorable. The monsters themselves are often a pleasure to fight because they essentially serve as optional boss fights. In fact, you'll pretty much always have hunts available to you at any one time that are way harder than the current story bosses. Probably the first one that truly overwhelmed me was the Ringworm hunt. It's only a rank 3 mark, making you think it'll be about on par with the other rank 3s in terms of difficulty, but then you venture out into Dalmascan Westersand and see that enormous sand-scoured worm prowling around the desert expanse, and maybe you start to get nervous. And then you try and hit it a few times and notice that its health bar has barely gone down at all, which might be around the time when you might realise you're a bit under-leveled. That was generally how hunts went for me. I'd be doing well with them, taking out mark after mark, before coming up against something that was way more than I can handle, at which point I would simply return back to progressing through the story and regular bosses. The absolute hardest are of course left for the late game though. The rank 7s like Fafnir, the Behemoth King and the dreaded Pile Raster, and my personal favourite, Gilgamesh.
The
God damn,
asteroid
I
is
love this dude,
depleted.
who like Miguel is also voiced by John DiMaggio.
Now we fight!
Seriously, I cannot describe how hyped I was the first time I saw him start to pull out weapons from previous Final Fantasy games, especially the Buster Sword from FF7 and the Brotherhood from FF10. Really difficult fight too, though he does something that several of the game's hardest marks and bosses do, something I really dislike in fact, where all of a sudden they become immune to damage. Sometimes it's just physical damage, sometimes magic, sometimes they cycle between immunities, and sometimes they are completely immune to all damage, and it sucks. As discussed, I'm not a big fan of the significant buffs enemies receive when they are close to death, but they're not egregiously bad or anything. They can just feel a bit cheap, and although I feel like a kind of a bitch for saying it, kind of unfair. But having some enemies capable of suddenly turning invincible for extended periods of time is on another level of bullshit, because they can sure as shit still damage you. Speaking of damage, in the Zodiac versions of the game they flat out removed the damage limit. In the original version, apart from a few exceptions, the most you could do per attack was 9,999, and for certain bosses, after getting them down below a certain HP threshold, the limit per attack would decrease to 7,777, because fuck you I guess. Some enemies in this game have massive levels of HP too. I mean, the boss with the highest HP in FF10 was Penance, who had 12 million. Then you had Nemesis with 10 million, which is a lot, but you could deal 99,999 damage per attack in that game. And you also had shit like attack reels and blitzes. Now compare that to FF12, which features Yayasmat, a holy worm with 50 million HP, in a game where the damage cap was only quad 9s. Then you have the Hellworm, which comes in at just shy of 9 million, and even monsters with much less HP like the Behemoth King, which had a bit over 1.5 million HP, could be a nightmare when your damage output was so restricted. So to be fair, if you've got a team who are all hasted up, your attacks are going to be coming out pretty frequently. My point is that I'm glad they removed the damage limit, because it never quite sat well with me in the old days. Though, to be honest, even without the damage limit, most of the time I don't really do more than 9,999 per attack anyway, if at all. And, to be fair, for those super bosses that I just mentioned, their massive HP pools and the fact that they took forever to beat was kind of the point. They were supposed to be marathons. Yayasmat is considered to be the ultimate mark, being unlocked after all other hunts have been completed and the Hellworm defeated. It's to be found in the Colosseum at the Ridorana Cataract and was famous for taking hours upon hours upon hours to defeat thanks to its absurdly large health bar. I have to be honest with you though, I've never actually beaten Yayasmat. The truth is that every time I've tried, I just get bored and abandon it. which surprisingly you can actually do, and then come back with its HP still at the same place where it was before. Though if you mess around too much without actually engaging it, it can regenerate literally millions of HP back at a time. Honestly though, one of my favourite things about taking down all these weird and wonderful creatures is getting to read their respective bestiary pages. It's the kind of feature I really wish more games had, especially FromSoft's games, which boast some of the most impressive, detailed and interesting enemy designs in all of gaming. But let's not go on another Dark Souls tangent. The bestiary is a fairly easy to miss feature being tucked away in the clan primer, but every single enemy, rare enemy, boss and esper in the game has its own entry here, most of which consist of multiple pages, and that same level of writing quality found everywhere else is present here too, with often fascinating explanations and histories into the origins and behaviours of the creatures of Ivalice, not written in a listless academic manner, but in fact being very colourful and descriptive, not to mention varied. It makes me extra excited when I encountered some new, particularly strange enemy, because I knew I'd be able to learn all about it in the bestiary, and maybe even learn a detail or two about a rare piece of loot that they had the potential of dropping to go towards a specific bizarre recipe. I know the bestiary might seem like kind of a minor thing to get so excited about, but it's yet another of the game's many finely crafted and well implemented components, all working together to create a rich, living world with a thoroughly thought out history, just begging to be explored and for its secrets, both ancient and new, to be uncovered. And folks, I think that makes for an excellent time to get us back to the game's story. I covered the characters and setup at the beginning, but let's now discuss how it all plays out. So, as the party are out exploring the world, searching for other pieces of the effective nethicite and ancient swords, every now and then you'll get cutscenes about the goings on in Arcades, showing figures like Emperor Gramis, the Senate, Vayne, Cid and the major judges. Through these